we have Councillor Davis can't make it because of other commitments, and we know one is going to be late. Councillor Kuntz has let us know we're going to be late. Haven't heard from the others. So right now we have quorum. There's 5 of us. If anybody needs to leave for anything, we need to let the clerk know so that we can then pause the meeting because we would be out of quorum. So that's the way. Yeah, that's right. When Councillor Kuntz is on her way, and when she gets here, then it'll be a little bit easier. You can step up and get a cup of coffee and come back without us losing quorum, but that's the way it is right now. So with that, I'll bring the special meeting of council to order. And the first item is the adoption and receipt of the agenda items. Can I have a motion, please? Moved by Councillor Ferguson, second by Councillor Woodward. And any discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed and carried. And next item, the only item on the agenda is the council priorities and budget process. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gordon McIntosh. Welcome here. Thank you for coming. Through Zoomland. And this is, again, an informal discussion led by Dr. McIntosh. And now, are you going to be managing the speakers list and just sit back and participate? If you want me to, whatever.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, Mayor Froese. If you can give me a hand doing that, I appreciate it. And Wendy's going to bring up the slide deck, and so she's going to be helping us take notes. So that'd be great.
And like I say, this is you don't want to make this informal. I think we can dispense with our procedural bylaw, and we can go by first names and just make this a nice,
thanks, Jack.
Nice morning, and start digging into our budget. So thank you.
Well, I think that's
thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jack. This so very clearly from our we started off I think might have been May and July trying to say how can we provide guidance to staff so that they're able to prepare a budget based on our direction rather than kind of guessing what's on our mind. So today is really preliminary days for sure. And so simply as Jack said, it's guidance only, no decisions. With that in mind, just a reminder, all ideas are good. Try and avoid, we tried that once before, that'll never work, that kind of stuff. We're just brainstorming, throwing out ideas. So proposed an agenda of 4 things that we're going to do today. One, as you know, generally I like to make sure we got a bit of a framework, a roadmap to kind of go through. We'll take you through that. I think it's important before we dive in and look at services, maybe just a few guiding principles or some criteria of trying to achieve what we're going to achieve. I think everybody's clear. What we're trying to do is look at revenue and expenditures to achieve maximum 3% lift in taxes. Now, the big thing we're going to do is really dive in. I bolded it, and we're going to dive right in, line by line, and I will be guided by your level of ideas, etc. So we're not trying to fill the day. We're just trying to get lots of ideas and earnest possibilities, if you will, for staff to look at as they prepare the budget. So we sent out a couple of attachments. The first one, you don't necessarily need these. And so the first one was the budget guidance that was sent out previously, but it's just a reminder. Next. And we this morning or last night, you were sent kind of at a glance. We'll take a closer look at this. This is very small. Previously in July, we looked at areas of interest. That may be something you want to look at because there were ideas that may come up today. And lastly, just a reminder, we're not reviewing these today, but you did have some strategic priorities that were established in July. Next. So what's the task? The task is definitely we're working towards 3%. That's a motion of council. So we want lots of ideas. It's okay, just, hey, what about this? What about that? The debate will come later when staff prepare these, sort of the feasibility, the details. And basically from today forward, today's kind of like a reveal, right? And we just want to make sure that we make best use of staff time, that they're not researching and analyzing stuff that council's not interested in. And of course, hopefully save council time as well. Next. So what's our framework? Well, we'll start with, I know a busy little chart, but we'll start with our foundation. What are there any assumptions? I'll propose some principles and criteria by which we would say, hey, this is a significant item that we should take a look at to achieve 3% in the 2022 budget. We'll take a look at the summary of the 2021 budget, 2022 outlook. I call it an outlook because what you'll see in the 2022 column is not a proposal at all. It's just very preliminary to give us some idea of scope. We'll then look at adjustments, and the adjustments will involve revenue ideas, traditional taxes, fees, etc., or new perhaps. Transfers, transfers from reserves, surplus, which we talked about last time. And of course, expenditures. Are there any areas, service areas that we can reduce? And let's face it, we're not talking about service excellence today. I think we did that about 3 years ago in capacity. We're really talking about how do we achieve 3% by lifting revenue somehow or reducing expenditures. So when we do this, sorry, I've got the window open and got a plane taking off.
Is that David? Sounds like David's cows, no?
Yeah, it's a big move. So where are we going to get to? I think we're going to need, just back up just a minute. Where we're going to get to is there will be some that you're going to guide staff that these are committed. They're not really touchable at this point. And those may be decisions you made in 2021, there'll be some that I think you will say, these are really, really possible, they're really quite probable. We're really keenly interested in that item. There's others where we may not have agreement among council, and I'll call those possible. Let's not ignore them, but maybe they're just a little more suspect. There's other ideas that you may have that will not impact particularly the 2022 budget to achieve 3%. But let's not lose those ideas either, because there may be some interim things that you do in 2022 that we're still going to need to look for adjustments in 2023 to accommodate them. So, summary, we're going to look at revenue adjustment targets, expenditure adjustment targets, and in order to achieve 3%. Thanks, Wendy.
I've got a question from
yeah, you bet. Thanks, Jack.
Yeah, Steve, go ahead.
Steve.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Sorry I was late. I got, believe it or not, caught up in Langley traffic. Gord, I have to apologize. I'm just going to ask, how when people ask for the logistics, where's the washroom and where's the drinking fountain? So that's where I'm coming from right now. Just real quick questions as to how to get started. I still got the cobwebs from putting the convertibles away in the motorcycle. So now it's raining. I'm back into the council, and I'm just thinking out loud as far as logistics. So these are just simple questions. Now, number one, you've given us information, which we're just looked at. I think we've had it. We got an email around 4 o'clock last night indicating some of the numbers. So that's one thing. Is this simple question? Is this our last budget of council? I don't know if you would answer that. Maybe the staff can answer that.
It depends what council wants to do next year. This is historically council on election year, it's the new council that comes in and does the budget. So whatever preliminary work we do, it'll be the new council that approves it. So this would be this council's, this term.
Perfect. That was a big question for me. Okay, their last budget, and I know that when the term starts again, everybody's jumping right into the budget. I remember that. I just want to clarify that. And the numbers you've given us, the staff and Gord, now we're going to look at that with some assumptions, and the 3% being the goalposts and what we want to work towards, and also I'm sure staff will give us an idea where we're at regarding the challenges of COVID, and we're not alone with all that. So that was all my questions. So that was just giving me logistics of how the day is going to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Stephen. And yeah, so we're really just, and I appreciate everybody's tolerance. We're just going to set up the platform, and then we're going to dive line by line into each area with ideas. So thanks, Stephen. Thanks. So some guiding principles, just really a repeat very quickly so we can get diving in. And by the way, I just go back, Stephen, to your washroom question, because I know that's important to you as well. So my suggestion will be probably every hour or so, we'll take 10 minutes, okay? Just to have a little stretch and do that kind of stuff. So guiding principles, these came from our July session, just to repeat, then we'll go round table, just make sure there's nothing to add or change. The average MPI, which is the municipal price index, something like that, 5%. Obviously that's a ballpark. The new growth rate equals 1.38%. That's actually a number for this year. So and again, hard to project the future. For government funding, none is assumed, no additional funding. We can all anticipate maybe changes, but other than, Mark, remind me, CH, is that the Art Center?
The concert hall.
Concert hall, okay. Apparently there was some indication that might be a serious item, but that's a capital item as well. 2021 additions, there were additions in 2021. We're assuming they're protected or they're confirmed, but we'll do that as we go account by account. I think an example might have been the police, I think police officers, etc. COVID, the recreation impact's a bit uncertain on both aspects, both expenditures, whether facilities are open or not, but also revenues. And when we get there, somebody can give us some more details. There was discussion last time that capital could be eased, right? So the contributions from the operating, and primarily today we're dealing with operating, not capital, but that the contributions to capital could be an area to look at. Labor costs, you may be aware that, of course, we've got different unions and we do have policing costs, or CMP costs, et cetera. There are recent settlements, so we know that may be coming. And it was just really a caution again. This is like our first reveal. This is not a budget. There is no budget proposed whatsoever. So those are some basic assumptions. I'll do the principles and then we'll just go around the table and see if there's anything else that we should be heads up to. The last discussion, we did talk about use of surplus for operating and I know discretionary, maybe not the right word, but council initiatives might be a better word. And so that was brought up at the last session. Use of reserves for interim adjustments, not just to subsidize temporarily an operation, although that's a possibility, but use of reserves if something needs to be invested to achieve the cost saving, perhaps it could be used. User pay was brought up, that there may be areas where we should be looking at who's paying for what. And the use of carry forwards may or may not be still valid. They may have been around for a while. And so those should be closely scrutinized. So let's just, so I know that's a little bit of stuff, but we thought, hey, better make sure we've got our foundation solid. And can anybody think of any other assumptions or principles to guide?
I got my hand up here.
Yeah,
Bob.
Thanks to everybody. Yeah. So this average MPI inflation. Now, perhaps we should have that, because the motion was passed by council that there would be, I don't know if it said this is what the increase will be, or the maximum increase will be, or the guiding principle to what the increase should be. But I don't have that motion handy. Maybe staff can direct me to it. Because didn't it relate to the MPI?
Yeah. So I'll ask.
And there was mention of this 3% too. So which one are we working with?
My recollection, and I'll ask the clerk if she looks it up, is that the operating tax increase would be 3% unless there's a business case for additional. I believe that was kind of the gist of it, but Wendy can maybe fill us in.
Yes, my recollection was it was a maximum at 3%, but with council's discretion to review. So I will find that motion and forward it.
Yeah, because I'm sure there was a reference to the MPI as well. Maybe
Yeah,
we better have that.
yeah, there was something reference to the cost of inflation. Inflation's actually gone up to, I think they're talking 4% now for regular inflation in Canada. Around
Well, so if it was related to inflation, either MPI or
yeah,
CPI,
I don't think it was
then that,
related to inflation, but I may have mentioned it. But we'll get it.
The MPI was mentioned in the motion, but it was MPI or maximum 3%.
Yeah.
So staff has been working with the 3% based on the MPI is obviously higher than the 3%.
Yeah. So it gives us some latitude, but council has that discretion, always has that discretion. But
so even though, yeah, so let's be clear then, even though that motion was passed, it really is meaningless if we, if we have to have
it is meaningful in the fact that it gives staff a direction.
I see.
And so then it gives them a direction to shoot for that 3%. If they feel, this is what it's going to take to get to 3%, and council feels that perhaps it should be adjusted up or down, that's up to council. But it gave staff that something to shoot for, and at least a starting point. Because I think there was a concern last year. We started at like 7 or 8%, and then council worked with staff to get it down. This time they're coming at 3%, and it still gives council that opportunity. So it's not meaningless. It just gives them a direction.
But instead of working it down, well, we're going to work it up.
Either way, yeah.
Maybe
stay open. Yeah, that's right.
Could that be emailed around to us? The exact
Yes.
wording of that motion.
Yeah,
Number one.
It's being
And
done.
number two, so on your assumptions, now we did have recently a presentation from the fire department. We don't know what will happen, but it certainly talked about increased staffing levels, and that's going to have a cost to it as well. So is that factored anywhere, or is it too early in the game or in the process at the moment?
It's a bit early, but when we get to line accounts, we can bring that up, right? For sure. Yeah. And back to your earlier comment, Bob. So last year and this year, we've talked about scenarios. So if target is 3%, what ends up happening is there'll be consequences that create other scenarios, right, above 3%. So I think staff are appreciative. I'll let Mark comment that it's not guessing, right? Like we're not just going to throw something out there that's like 10% as a proposal. So that was the idea. Mark, any observation?
No, that's correct, Gord. We're trying to establish a bit of a framework with some agreed upon principles we can bring back that fits the direction of council and the needs we've heard expressed. So just to give a bit of an overview, for example, we know at this early date that the revenues are less than the expenses. That's quite normal and quite natural. So the goal is to focus on how we can bring those back into equilibrium. And of course, that depends upon one's policies or philosophies in terms of some of this. So for example, as you articulated, Gord, we could use potentially for the short-term surplus. Another option might be to take our yearly capital program and say we're going to borrow for that, just as a hypothetical. Mm-hmm. Another option would be to raise user fees. Another option would be to reduce some services in some areas. That's the gambit we begin with. And with this model, which is largely thanks to Gord, we're hoping we can narrow it down so we can spend less time in developing multiple scenarios and more time in drilling down on some of the key points for council.
Great. Thanks, Mark. So and this is a bit of a kind of repeat from July, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But if don't see anything, Jack, we're okay. Okay.
Yeah, there's no more hands unless I know you said you want to do roundtable, but there's no more hands up.
Well, I think maybe the next one's more critical, Jack. So let's go there. Okay. So if our earnestness today is really to use our collective minds, creativity to look at budget alignment efforts, then I was going to propose some criteria. One would be, what would be, for whatever we're thinking, is there a significant community impact? Some, it may be invisible, it'd be low, and then some might be, oh, wow, if we do this, it's not a showstopper, it's just a heads up. This is going to be very, very visible. And so we might want to think about that. The second is budget impact. And you know what? I remember when I was doing Campbell River and the pulp and paper mill closed, and the mayor at the time said, well, let's stop serving coffee at meetings. And so significance means let's avoid looking for nickels and dimes in the couch. We need to look for, things that are significant. And we were just proposing over 50, but you can see cumulatively 20,000, 30,000, 50,000. These things will add up. The second is we are primarily looking for the budget impact of 2022. We don't want to ignore 2023, but those are worthy of a certain level of discussion. The focus is really 2022. Staff implementation. Again, not a showstopper, just a heads up that if we're going to pursue this adjustment, will it require a lot of staff time? Or, you know what? This is relatively easy staff-wise, wouldn't take a lot of effort to do. And lastly, just a proposal. And again, not a showstopper. I don't want anybody to come up with ideas and say, wow, that's going to be too expensive to implement. A transition cost may very well be where you use reserves or surplus or another fund to make sure you do it. So there are some that will be very doable, not hard. Others may have high costs, but there may be a way to overcome that. So where are we? We're heading towards what's in place, committed, confirmed, notionally in this preliminary round, not touchable. That's good for staff to know. 2022, probable. That's just council kind of getting a sense, no votes, right? No decisions. That is really, really interesting and very probable for us to achieve. 2022, possible. We're willing to consider that. We may not have a high sense among you that everybody's on board with that. And again, this is not a decision-making process. So I don't want anybody to think, oh, well, we don't all agree on that. We don't have to agree on. Why? Because we don't have enough information on some of these ideas that we're going to come up with. And recall, the principle of good decision-making is that we have adequate information to have a good debate. And so that's all we're doing today, is really setting up what's in place, what's highly probable, and what's possible so that staff can bring back information. Everybody good with that? Okay.
Yeah, don't see any hands. Yeah.
Okay, next one. Okay, we're almost there. So I'm going to we're just going to provide a general backdrop, and then we're going to go account line by line through that big page that you just got last night. So I'm going to let Mark just give us a bit of a high-level overview of the budget.
Thank you, Gord. Again, this is a bit of a qualification as to the numbers because we're still just actually finalizing our first half year for 2021 and probably won't be able to get our third quarter numbers up until about early November. So what that should tell you then is for this, we're really taking our last budget cycle's second year of our 5-year plan and using that as the basis. Those numbers do not get the same attention or diligence as others, but in this circumstance, it does give us a jumping off point for which we can start the process to begin our financial planning process. As well, we're very uncertain as to the inflation factor. The current inflationary factor is very variable. We're seeing a spike. There are theories that spike will continue. We're hearing theories that it will normalize and come back down. At this point, we just don't know, so it makes it very difficult, but we're trying to work within the framework of the percentages Gord's talked about, which was between the 3% and 5% in terms of what we're seeing, and hope for the best but expect the worst. Again, as was referenced, we're not expecting any COVID grant revenue. I want to be very clear on that. Any operational support is not really expected. We haven't heard any rumblings or rumors from the political leaders on this, so as a consequence, we're we're thinking that the one-time grant that we received and used in 2020 is not going to be available in 2021. And in some ways, well, that grant was so important to us in 2021, it does create a bit of a gap for 2022 because we were using that as a bridge. And as we're seeing, the economic activity, at least in terms of our revenue, is not increasing as rapidly as we would have liked to have seen. Particularly, and I'm kind of jumping around here a bit, but particularly in the area of recreation, where I think we assumed 50% revenue for 2021, and we were trying to see things return to normal in 2022. Early indications are that's not going to be the case at all. Instead, it's likely that we're going to see an incremental increase. So we've taken effectively 50% of the 50% increase we saw and added that in, which basically means we think we're going to be operating on revenue assumptions of maybe 2/3 of what we traditionally have. And that's particularly important for us because what it means is that when we go forward with our revenue assumptions, we have to still maintain our staffing costs, but we have to assume lower revenue. And a good example is the ACUCC. At its peak, it can operate with about 1,400 people. This year, I think the peak, roughly, we'll say, was 400 people. I think it was 450. That's a drop in attendance for each session, potentially, of the big sessions, of 1,000 people. 1,000 people provide as revenue, and if that's over 3 sessions per day, let's say it's at $3 per session, that's almost $10,000 a day in the high times. That's a significant reduction in our revenue, but still maintaining the costs. As we multiply that through the organization for other sorts of programs, whether they be in other divisions or back in recreation, we are seeing the rate of return of the revenue at less than we had actually hoped. Having said that, though, we're also seeing that the growth factor from our, development processes is actually a little bit less than was hoped. The growth has been adjusted to reflect 1.38%, which is what it was in 2021. What we've had that verified from the assessment authorities. We were hoping to see it more in the area of 1.7%, but we think that it's going to be lower, not lower, but we're going to maintain that level in 2022. As has been referenced, we've seen an assumption of the property tax change at 3%. Originally, when we did the second year of the 2021 budget, which of course is the 2022 budget, we were looking at a gap of 7.5%. So we start off with a bit of a gap, but that was expected and quite normal in the process until we can have these sorts of discussions with council as to what's going to be the priorities or the importance. Should also say that for this year, we're assuming the previous direction is provided by council as to the infrastructure or the capital program contribution. We've been increasing that slowly each year, primarily in areas of paving, but other areas as well, as we tried to build that up to a number that we thought would be sustainable. We've maintained that model, but again, it may be something council wants to look at going forward, even if it's only on a short-term basis to see what can be done to sort of flatten the curve that we seem to be experiencing with our expenditures. As well, in 2021, we've maintained the staff direction for such things as the RCMP that were previously requisitioned. We've also taken into account some of the initiative council has directed, such as tree protection, arborists, bylaw officers. All of those areas are things we're maintaining because they were what our direction was. So we have purposely included those, even though we know we're a bit challenged by some of the differences between revenue and expenses, because those are council's directions. If it was left to staff, and again, this is why this is such a valuable program, staff ordinarily, when they're facing with these numbers, they discontinue adding additional services. Our mantra would be to maintain as opposed to add. That I don't think would work in this scenario. And that's why we're so fortunate to see council's direction and to confirm that these are things that they actually do want to continue with. Again, we also experienced some annualizations. This year, we've seen that some of the matters we started last year or in previous years has taken some time to catch up to us, but it's expected and understood that they would, because we're seeing, if we requisition, say, 10 officers in 2020, I think we thought we would have 5 in 2020 and in 2021. 5 in 2021, we expected to see the other 5 in 2022. So that annualization occurs, and we're looking at that in other areas as well, as we talked about tree protection, RCMP, but also, as most recently referenced, the fire presentation that just came up Monday indicated a need or an item that should be considered, which is the aspect of adding additional firefighters on some of the trucks. So that overview might just give you some perspective as we go forward, again with the emphasis on trying to come up with some realistic numbers historically, with a view to trying to frame or shape the budget before we spend too many hours and resources on trying to come up with alternate scenarios.
Thank you very much, Mark. Again, we're going to dive in, of course, to all these points, but just generally, any comments or questions of Mark? Okay. Oh, I just never put the pen on, right? Just do that pause.
Actually, can I
There you go,
ask a
Bob.
question? Do you mind?
No, go
Yeah,
ahead.
for sure.
Okay, so property tax, where it says growth, now I'm confused about the growth. So we, if I remember correctly, at the last budget, we thought, well, maybe growth will be better. So we projected 1.7, but it actually came in at 1.38. Is that what we're saying here? So there's quite a shortfall there. What kind of numbers is that? Like, what's a 0.1% growth number? Just so we get an idea of. Is it the 50,000 one? Whatever.
As a rule of back to your original question, actually the growth, you're quite right, we thought would be a little bit higher, but what this represents is BC Assessment's determination of the increase in our overall community assessed values. With all of the activity we're seeing, we had thought we were being actually quite conservative at saying it was going to be 1.7. Well, it turns out, because of a whole bunch of reasons, the economy, COVID, development processing time, change of product mix for some of the folks that are out there that are doing development, it came in at 1.7. At 1.38. So that's down roughly, 0.3, 0.32. Generally speaking, for every 0.1, you're looking at $100,000, meaning that 1.38 would represent about $1 million, actually a bit more than that, $1.4 million, $1.5 million in terms of what that would relate to. And we'll get to some specific numbers later on in the presentation, because finance has worked those up, and they can actually give you some crib notes in terms of, when we see a percent, what that equates to. But by recollection, roughly 1% was $1,400,000.
So that shortfall, how was that funded?
Well, it will be funded, in fact, from our overall budget. Well, the revenues were less in that circumstance. Hopefully revenues are higher in other circumstances, or expenses were reduced. So as you'll see, the numbers we're hoping in 2021 will come fairly close to matching, but that may be because a number of initiatives were delayed or put out to the next year, pushed out to the next year. So we'll see that as we go forward as to some of the challenges, but right now we think we're about in equilibrium, with probably not much of a surplus and hopefully not much of a deficit, but it's going to be very tight. This will be probably our tightest year on record.
Right. So, and finally, the document that was sent around yesterday that shows a preliminary budget with an asterisk there, it's presuming that it'll be a 1.38 again, I guess, which is a more realistic figure, because it was what last year's was. Is that right?
That's correct. We've simply taken that and rolled it over. And again, just to emphasize, that number is really a projection of the financial statements from last year with the limited knowledge we had going forward. So it's not a budget document, it's more of a financial statement, if you will. It's part of the tool we use for modeling.
Got you. Okay, thanks so much.
Steve, and then Blair.
I'm just like double checking as well. I mean, you've got obviously a little bit going. Have you got all well, not all. I mean, obviously you're bringing in more and more information on growth, more information on how the recreation comes into place, more recreation more information on other departments, and you're not quite there as providing as much as we can. We're at discussion stages, and the growth. As we drive around Langley, I noticed that as much as some projects that come in, it looks like we've got a year or a couple of years before some other, I would say, density project come into place. Whether that just adds that much to the actual growth, I don't know. I'm talking about mostly through the Willoughby area. There's a lot of projects just aren't in place, or some around here are in place. So are you able to comment on those points, if I may, through the chair?
Your Worship, certainly it's been very busy for construction activity, but keep in mind that the construction activity doesn't drive the assessed values. It's actually the land uses that drive the assessed values. So if, for example, you have a property that was perhaps zoned for a tower, for example, that valuation would be reflected at the time of the zoning, not at the time of construction. So some of those numbers are built in. When we look at we're seeing out in the marketplace, we're seeing really that the values for land are exceptionally high, but the rate of increase is actually beginning to ease simply because of affordability. I think one of the bigger issues we noticed was as well that in some of the rural properties, we saw some significant rural property assessments increase, even though there was no change in land use. It became a market factor for demand as to what people were looking for in the marketplace. Those are the things that actually drive our demand and therefore drive our assessments. And what we're seeing in other communities, while it was very busy for a while, it seems to be moderating. Still certainly strong growth, but not quite at the 2% level that we had hoped, only for the purposes of raising revenue.
So I guess that's half the answer. What I really wanted to know, and I'm really drilling down here now, if you got 1,000 units coming in, so those people are, number one, the developer has done all the DCC, all the other work. That part's one side, and also they're going to be paying tax. Every single one of those 1,000 units is now going to be paying, I guess, property tax and other things. So that's just one example. Does that impact our growth, or does that impact contribution to whatever you want to call it, to our revenues?
It does, but it does so historically. So for example, if we take 1 acre in Willoughby that was originally zoned for a single family house, that might produce, just for purposes of illustration, $10,000. When the moment it's rezoned to say being something that might have 100 units, the taxes on that property might go from $10,000 to $100,000, even though from the outward appearance there's simply the same house that's sitting there. But the land use designation change is reflected in the assessment. When it comes time to build that building and then sell it, that's when the market kicks in, and then the market kicks in and says, well, you know what? Those units aren't worth $100,000, they're worth $125,000. So you get a slight bump at the time of construction, but the construction bump is not nearly as high as the rezoning bump. And I think what we've been seeing is that the level of rezonings, because of the marketplace, is moderating. Certainly strong, but still moderating because of the market conditions and the cost of the product itself.
What about the 1,000 residents paying taxes?
Well, when the tax bill is changed from that 10,000 to my 100,000, that usually becomes moderated through we'll call it the subdivision process, and it may not, but it may take you to a higher tax rate as part of the market sale. But that will take a year to catch up. So
that's what I thought, yeah.
So it would be, in my illustration, from land use designation change, it may be a 3 or 4 year process. You wouldn't actually get true market values for the separate units until maybe 4 to 5 years out.
That's what I was wondering, yeah. It's going to take time for those things. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. I'll let you continue to direct traffic, Jack.
Yeah, Blair's up next.
Yeah, thanks. I just had a question around the 7.51 that shows that was projected based on all of the revenues and expenses that are coming. Is that inclusive of the items at the bottom bullet where you said fire, tree protection, RCMP? Are those items sort of in that 7.51, or are those to be added later?
Your Worship, some are included and some are not. So, for example, in 2020, when we did the budget, as I recall, we determined we're going to add a number of police officers. We knew that they wouldn't all arrive in 2020; they'd arrive sometime in 2021. So, therefore, that annualization was done for 2020 at the time of 2021. Likewise, as we did the 2021 budget, we did further annualizations. More arrived, perhaps not all arrived. So as a consequence, they were known and they were plugged into the model, so that we're now facing the fact that maybe we ordered 10 officers in 2019 or 2020. They're all fully arrived in that illustration. Things that were added, though, through the 2021 year so far, and just because of the timing, a good example is the tree protection initiatives. They were not thought of or discussed in the 2021 budget process. They were certainly recognized as being important, but no model was in place. So through this year, Council's provided direction that we should begin to increase our I guess, resources in those areas to ensure that the trees and the tree canopy are protected. Those numbers are not built in yet, and that'll be something we have to do as we get through further in the process. So if one looks at your question to the, I guess to the ultimate question in terms of, well, are our numbers and overall, are they conservative? Are they extreme? What do we actually think we're dealing with? We would think that our numbers are a little conservative. However, the past has taught us that in fact they weren't conservative. They were a little bit ambitious. In fact, we're still concerned that with some of the costs coming in, that overall we're seeing that we're conservative on our revenues, conservative on our expenditures, but ambitious on our revenues. We think the gap is going to be where it is or larger as we go forward, and that's why the early start in terms of trying to corral some of the initiatives will help us get a good head start for the 2022 budget.
So look, I understood that the RCMP that we had in the past budget, we had already put the money into the budget and now annualizing it. So is this saying that we still need to add more for RCMP? Because I thought we had sort of already did that, and therefore that increase was already adjusted for.
Your Worship, a bit more complicated than that, so we'll start with the easy one. For example, we have been carrying forward some funds, noting that the RCMP were effectively entering into a collective bargaining arrangement with the federal government, and we've been able to put some money, a sizable amount away for that adjustment. The impact of that, by way of illustration, has been something like the cost of an officer will increase from $85,000 to $105,000. In that ballpark, just gives you the significance of that settlement. So that's one part of the story, and that's, that is in hand, so to speak, depending upon how the final numbers shake out. I think what you're referring to is, well, let's say that in 2021 we decide to add 10 police officers, and then the question is, when do we pay for those 10 police officers? Well, if we know that only 5 are going to arrive, or 10 are only going to arrive for half the year, then we actually increase the budget and built into the budget the 5, or if you will, the 10 for half the year. It's the next year then we've already agreed to do so that we have to then experience the further increase. So the further increase in 2022 would be, in my illustration, would be that we would be adding the money in. So council's authorized it, but if you will, we've ordered it but haven't paid for it. And in the budget cycle, when there are part year acquisitions, the annualization automatically occurs in the second year or third year, whenever it may actually be, but it's not something that has been, while it's been pre-authorized, it hasn't been fully costed or fully expended until they actually arrive.
Right, okay, so will these items that are listed there, for example, fire, I don't know if that relates to a previous request with fire, or I'm guessing this does not relate to the delegation we just had on Monday. Will we get a listing of these items and exactly what the financial cost is if we were to add these or not?
So you're quite correct. So as to some of the numbers you're seeing, those are for prior commitments, as we'll say. So those are easy to provide because we're looking at what was previously agreed upon or previously directed. For some of the initiatives, though, but for example, the delegation Monday, for example, we would need some direction on council to say, well, to consider that, what would the cost be? So if we take as an illustration, just as an illustration, the decision was that there was, that there is a need for 4 additional fire members. We know, historically speaking, that a rule of thumb average is about $100,000. It's probably a little bit less than that, but those are things we can estimate once we know whether the number is 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. Those are the sorts of input we need in terms of trying to build it. Because, of course, those additions are beyond the annualizations. Those are really service enhancements, and those are things where the council direction from a policy perspective is so important to say, well, no, as Gord mentioned, this is what we've agreed upon, this is what we want to build in. Let's look where we can raise those funds to pay for those somewhere else, or whether it be expense reductions or additional revenue.
So the last bullet here, fire, has nothing to do with the delegation this week.
Right.
Correct. It was. There's been some historical fire things, although it is a good reminder to us that there is an outstanding item for consideration, in that there was even a motion made that will be referred to the 2022 budget process. There, the delegation from the union.
Okay, but there's no, yeah. Okay, so We'll see if there's any more questions, but again, the reason for this overview is just to show us the challenge, right? And we'll dive in, we'll talk about fire, police, we'll talk about all these, but this is just to kind of portray our mutual challenge, right? Our elected officials / administrative challenge doesn't matter whether we're 3%, 3.5, 5%, whatever, we got some work to do. Is that the tone? Is everybody good?
Yeah, I think so. So we're going to get deeper into this. I had a few
Yeah.
questions just on the sheet that we got, the budget, preliminary budget.
Are you on the next page, Jack, or this one?
That one, yeah. So I
Yeah,
don't know, we're
yeah,
not
that
doing a deep dive.
And we will go through
questions.
each of these line by line.
Yeah. So in the green, 5.92%, that is where we have to find the 5.92% is basically what this is showing us if we're to follow this. The other thing, so the special contracts RCMP, I know that was discussed. So that includes the new settlement. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, but I'll ask Sandra, who's out there, just to confirm in terms of what's included in some of these numbers and what is not, because that seems to be a point we return to. So Sandra, are you out there and can you comment?
Yes, we'll get to that as we get through, which we'll see some of the assumptions, but yes, the RCMP included the annualization, the planned additional, and some additional funding that we believe will cost us due to the settlement.
Okay. Yeah, and okay, so I'll wait till we go through the lines. I've got other questions, but okay, thanks.
It's because really that's where we want to get to, right? So here's what we're going to do if we're okay. And next slide. Oh, maybe just back up one, I think.
So you've just let you know, you've hit just about an hour. So if you
we're going to take a stretch. Yeah. So I'll set us up.
So your call.
You bet. I made a promise, right? Wendy, can you just go to 12 maybe? No, 13. Thanks. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a little stretch, 10 minutes. We're going to come back. We're going to go through every line. With taxes, we've combined 3. So we're going to do, first of all, a little bit, a deeper dive as you have initiated, just so we understand. And then we'll go up and say, hey, is there any ideas? They're just ideas. When we've got the ideas, Wendy's going to help us record those. And then we'll say what's committed, what's probable, and what's possible. So let's do, shall we call it 10:10? We'll come back, Jack?
Your call. You know what we have to go through.
Yeah, let's do 10 minutes and then we'll come back and we'll do our dive.
Thanks.
Well, let's begin. I think there was one more slide, Mark, that is backdrop. Do you want to cover this one? Have we got Mark? Sandra? Okay. Well, let's go through. I'll do my best then. We have the motion. Everybody should have a copy. I got a copy of it. I think, again, it seems like it's guidance. The CPI, so therefore we've got, how did they come up with the 5.5? No COVID grants anticipated. We've already covered that. The surplus, as Mark earlier indicated, we just lost the PowerPoint, I think, is minimal or kind of 0 to 400,000. And
yeah,
time out.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's something wrong with my audio, and they just fixed it.
Okay.
I want to ensure we have quorum before we start. And
Sure. Okay.
Councilor Woodard has just come in, and Councilor Whitmarsh, are you there? I know it's an informal workshop, but we do Need a quorum. So just waiting for Councilor Whitmarsh to turn his camera on. So I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you get to start all over again.
Yeah, okay.
There he is. Okay, so, okay, we're all back, and Gord, I'll turn it over
Okay.
to you now. Start
Yeah,
again.
so just
Thanks.
very quickly, I think we've covered, this was one more slide that staff had prepared, so I think we've covered a lot of it, though. One is the motion. You should have received a copy of it as guidance. How did they calculate the 5.5? COVID grants, which we've talked about. Mark did highlight the surplus is negligible, and the annualization is he's already commented on. So next slide.
I've
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
Yeah, Bob.
absolutely.
Go ahead.
I don't want to belabor this too much. Okay, so I got the motion. The motion was made July 12th. What was the MPI then? Because the motion was based on the MPI, because you couldn't possibly include the current MPI in this motion because it's way higher than 3%. So I think at that time it was like 2.5%. So
No, Mr. Backham is going to comment.
no, I think I'm just commenting that this
Yeah.
motion is a little bit
Dated.
yeah, yeah.
Dated. Yeah, but again, I think we could debate all that, but I think the point is, if it's this number is just sort of the projection, we know that we need to look at enhancing revenue or decreasing expenditures, regardless of where it ends up. Is that fair? And just looking for a couple nods. So whether it ends up being 3.5%, 4%, 3.83, doesn't matter. We got, staff definitely need some guidance to do some work. Great. I think we've got Eric.
Okay. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, thanks. Just want to clarify, the motion seems self-evident to me. I mean, I'm not going to get too bogged down in percentages, but it does say, the two options and then whichever is lower. So I don't see how it's dated. I think it's trying to target 3% regardless of current conditions. So I think it's unfair to characterize it as dated. Seems like pretty clear direction to me. And unless there's another motion overturning that or changing that, I think that's the target regardless of Councillor Long's comments. Thanks.
Great, thanks. So you've already received this. It's impossible to read, so that's not the point. So next slide.
Okay, Steve, your question, Steve, while
Steve?
he's changing slides.
I just want to clarify too, the motion was made on July the 12th, and, it's basic self-explanatory. I think it's working forward. Wouldn't consider that dated. Anyway, that's my own point. Thank you.
And as I stated earlier, it was a guideline for
That's right.
for staff to shoot for, and then we basically.
Let's be clear on this though. If the MPI was 5% at the time this motion was proposed, there's no way we would have passed it. How could you say it would be lower?
But that's immaterial. It still is a lower. It's a lower of the. And no, but it's a factor. It's a lower of the two is what the motion says. But nevertheless, council still has the ability to go through the budget and make adjustments as they see fit. So the motion is, set a target, and certainly I think because it passed, we're all are looking, at least as a council decision, looking forward to getting that. But it also says with business cases that we can add to it. So that's really today is just the overview, and then there may be a business case to I'm gonna use fire for example to bring on 4 new firefighters, or it might be a business case to reduce. One of the things, so that's really what we're working through. The motion's there. I think it's a guideline at the time. It's certainly we're working towards 3%. I think we have that desire to get there, but we have a process to go through to be fair to the organization and to the residents. So I'll turn it back to Gord. Thanks.
Great, thank you for that. So we're going to go line by line. Having said that, the lines are not perfect and it allows you to go anywhere. But let's start with revenue, and we'll go to staff. I think they've got 3 in a row related to taxes, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Who's going to lead this, Mark?
At this point, I think Sandra's going to jump in and just cover the categories and just a very brief description.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, so this was just where we start our budget, which is just based on the previous year's base budget. So it includes all of last year's revenue. And then this is our assumption on new growth. And as stated earlier, this can fluctuate and we will continue to monitor this. We put it in at last year's, which was 1.38. Originally, it was budgeted at 1.7 for the entire 5-year budget. We'll start to get indicative rates on this later in the year, so we can update it.
Right.
This was where we put the 3% in as our baseline for an increase. Prior year, so 2021 was actually 3.99%, as you may recall.
So let's do all three. You've got three here, Sandra.
Yeah, 3, property tax from new growth.
So there's 3 related to property taxes. So Sandra, can you go through all 3 and then we'll open it up?
Sorry, did I not? I think I went through all 3 of them. That was all 3 of them.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay. Sorry. So maybe, okay. So continue to go, Wendy. Next one.
Now we're into the other revenue numbers. So this one where we start the more ones that can fluctuate.
Okay.
This is our sale of services. So this is all services that we would consider sale of services. So the largest one in here is recreation and culture. So I've sort of drawn attention to that. We did assume that we would have a 50% return from our 2021 reduction due to COVID. We are in discussions with the Recreation Department at this point to see how that is looking. It may, due to the continuing COVID situation, we may not be able to return 50% of that revenue in this current year. The plan, this budget reflects about 65% of that revenue being in place in 2022.
I have a question on that one. So if there was a lower sales of services for the recreation, is there, I probably don't already know the answer, but also a lower cost associated with the lower services if we had to close down or reduce amounts of time that people can be at our facilities? Mr. Backen.
Your Worship, not really. In fact, what we've seen with my UCC example was we've seen the number of people able to attend because of COVID drop dramatically, but still the same staffing levels. The only real way to achieve that would be to discontinue the service or suspend the service for a period of time, and that was discussed by Council previously, and the direction was to try to bring all services back online as best we could, which is certainly a wise policy decision, but a challenging financial decision. So maintaining the current direction, Sandra is simply saying that we don't think we'll actually get back to our traditional revenues. We're taking a lesser number. So in fact, this number here for revenue increase might in fact be a bit optimistic, but at this point, hard to say.
Jack, just before we continue, Wendy, can you put it to the next slide, please?
And Blair has a question too.
Okay. So, but good point. So do we see interest, because I want to take every idea, that if there's lower revenue, and this is where when you make a note, if there's lower revenue, do you want to see an expenditure strategy, a reduction strategy in recreation?
Okay. I'll go to Blair. He's got his hand up. Blair?
Yeah, just on the same topic, 50, the model is assuming that we'll return 50% of the revenue that we had reduced in 2021 into the budget in 2022. If we continue that assumption, is that by 2023, we're anticipating that we'll be back to sort of our full revenue in recreation, that by 2023, we'll be back to 100%? Is that sort of the kind of the ballpark idea?
Your Worship, conceptually, that's a good way of expressing it. Practically, I don't think we're going to be there by that level. Sandra, could you perhaps run through the assumptions again? Because I think it takes a while to absorb.
So originally, we were bringing back, had an assumption that we would bring back 50% of the revenue in 2022, another 25% in 2023, and be back fully to our pre-COVID levels in 2024. So that's what this budget still reflects.
Okay, that's helpful to know. When we talk sales of service, I recognize recreation is maybe a significant portion of it. What other sort of items would be included, just in a general way, in sales of service?
Good question. And are there some other targets? So good question.
Outside of recreation, is
Yeah.
what are sales of service items that sort of fall into this category?
Sandra, did you want to start, and I'll try to fill in? Whoops.
We lost Sandra.
Did we lose Sandra? So would this include, for example, development fees, land development management fees? Would that be in there, Mark?
Yes, correct, Gord. So just a brief commentary while we locate Sandra. The short answer is yes. The sales of services we're talking about come from all facets. We have a few constraints, however, and one constraint is that in many of the areas we're limited to seeking cost recovery. So for example, if we were doing development applications, we really shouldn't be charging more than the amount of the development application plus perhaps an overhead charge for the administrative functions that go along with that. So subject to those limitations, our whole model is based on cost recovery. So we have a broad range, a smorgasbord we can look at, but we must be mindful that some are well below cost recovery, for example, recreation, because of course that's an important factor, whereas others may be nearing or at a level of cost recovery. Sandra, we brought you back.
Sorry, there are some other items in this line, and some of them are recoverables, which are basically will just show up as a revenue and expense. But we also have things like cemetery fees are in there. Airport fuel fees end up in this line. But the main thing really is the recreation revenue, though it's a significant portion of these lines.
Okay. So are there areas, so I'll try and prompt a little bit, but are there areas that administration feel the fees are not covering all the costs plus an administrative fee?
I'll start. Certainly, Gord, there are, but they become some significant policy issues. So for example, a directive that we'll pick on recreation because it's the one that is always topical. If there was a movement towards moving recreation fees to be cost neutral or cost recoverable, that would be a significant policy decision for staff and would probably take a couple of years to phase in because it might lead to a doubling or tripling of some of those recreation fee rates. So that's the policy or philosophical discussion we would look for some direction on because of the impact. Because vis-a-vis, that's what some taxpayers would like to see. It's what others would not want to see because, of course, of the fact of affordability. As Sandra was saying as well, there's some things in some other areas. Cemeteries is a good example. It may be captured in this category, but we can't charge cemetery fees at a rate that would be exceeding what our cost recovery would actually be. And I think we're probably pretty close on those, but that would take a bit of a deeper dive. I think as you've put the parameters, Gord, there's lots of little things that we could perhaps tweak, but it's not going to deal with the bigger problem, which, as Sandra has indicated, is predominantly in the RCP area just because of our philosophy.
Okay. So far on our register, we have, if we are going to get lower revenue in recreation, one option is it possible to then curtail, suspend a service? That should be looked at. Are there any other areas that council would say, if we're going to realize lower revenue in recreation, any other options that you'd want administration to consider? Okay. Not hearing any.
Maybe a quick comment. I think if there is a drastic reduction in services that we can provide due to the pandemic, certainly that we'd have to look at some reductions. And I think, as Mr. Backen said, it's not going to be equal. If if revenues drop $1 million, our costs won't drop $1 million. But I think we can't ignore the fact that we'd have to take some measures as we did during 2021, 2020 to reduce the costs. So that may be staffing because of, but it may be the change under the pillows when, as you talked about, small amounts, but you're not, you obviously would reduce some staffing, but the cost of keeping the operation, the building, functioning is still going to be there. So I don't know if we can put something in for that, because there would be some reduction in staffing for sure. When you don't have to hire lifeguards, you don't have to hire people, taking the money because no one's coming in, but you do have to ensure that the building still goes. So maybe Mr. Backen can help, because there would be some reduction, I'm sure.
So thank you, Your Worship. I think it's a good point to clarify. Using my UCC example, if ordinarily is the wrong term, if we can hit an attendance of 1,400 and we're limited at 400, the staff complement might go from 8 to 7 to meet the WCB requirements or health and safety guidelines, et cetera. Those sorts of adjustments are already contained in the model. What's not clear, though, is, well, maybe we could actually get down to 4 staff if we only operated half the time. Or maybe we could actually suspend services for 3 months of the year and have it totally shut down or whatnot. I think the important point to remember is that most of our Parks and Recreation programs or facilities are always going to operate on the basis that when they're closed, we get our maximum savings. That being that we don't have the expenses because each has a subsidy element contained in it. So for each hour we're open, we add more. Now that's not to advocate for the closure, far from it. It's been a policy decision of many councils that those are important programs, and that's an appropriate place to look. It's really getting the balance in terms of the right level of service given the right level of cost. And I think what we're looking at is something more than simply the tweaking of the staff. It's really, are we able to look at something significant as to hours of operation or facilities and those sorts of things? And the answer may very well be no.
So let's make a note of that then, because that's the clarity we need. Reduce services, hours of operation, and or facility closure, right? Yep. So those are okay.
You've got Steve and Bob. Yeah, Steve and then Bob.
No, I think we're sitting here planning, we're sitting thinking, I think it's really, really good. And I even, Gordon, we kind of need to pull on your expertise. I mean, we're all in this together, the COVID and other things. And, we're again, I keep saying we're a non-casino community. And I know that those folks are probably, with casinos, are probably happy they have them now. The interesting thing is, we should explore and ask and brainstorm and everything with other communities and other regions, maybe even throughout the country, what kind of strategies and opportunities arise, because money is a difficult thing, and raising money and keeping money and protecting services and other thknow are all generally a concern. And I know that every community is unique and they have to do things within the community, but I know we have to task staff to find other opportunities, and they might have to ask what other people are doing, because we're all in this together. We're not alone. So we have to find ways, and I guess some communities just raise their taxes. In our cases, we need to be somewhat more creative. So, Mr. Backen and your staff, are you going in and asking and maybe trying to brainstorm with other communities, because we're not in this together? Have you got a comment regarding that?
The RCP staff are continually having that dialogue through the BC Association of Recreation, the BCRPA, I think it's called. And they're seeing what others are doing. And many are suffering from the same malaise in terms of what they're seeing. And there's 2 schools of thought that are effectively being discussed. One is to reduce the expenses, or the other is to raise the revenues. And when I mean that, take them from other sources, increase property taxes or reallocating from property taxes are some of the things that we're actually hearing. Where we're a bit unique is that some of our destination facilities tend to do well, but they're very revenue, dependent. And those would be things like LEC, ACUCC, all those sorts of things. Some of our smaller ones that we've had have been more challenging because they've had a bigger overhead cost, and we've talked about those before, but still have some valuable services. If we were to be, separate and apart from other communities, it would be in the nature of our facilities, and that we haven't fully transitioned, shall we say, to sub-regional facilities. And let's use Aldergrove as a nice safe example, because in Aldergrove there was an outdoor pool, and then there was the ACUCC. In that case, the outdoor pool was replaced by a spray park, whereas if we were to try to have operated both, it would have been much more of a challenge for us. And that's, of course, purely a policy decision in terms of what the demand capacity is for Aldergrove. So that may be give to illuminate some of the challenges we face.
Okay. And I think back to Steve's point, as we get ideas from council for each, and we've got, by the way, 25 lines to go through, just a little bit of context here. As we get ideas from council, those would be researched relative to other jurisdictions. I think Jack Bob's next.
Yeah, well, then that's a perfect segue, Gord, because like Mr. Back into Mark's example, if you've got a pool, let's take Walnut Grove, for example. We still have to heat the water, whether there's 50 people in there or 500 people, whatever the number is. We still have to have the same amount of lifeguards. I would think you might be able to go from 8 to 7 or 7 to 6 because you got fewer people in there, but you still have a geographic area to monitor. So you can't cut the pool in half. It's still there. And so the capacity limits that have been put on there come from the province, from the PHO. We're in a pandemic. So we're kind of helpless there. So now I'm a little concerned because in the assumptions in the previous slides, it said, well, there won't be any COVID granting this year. So perhaps there isn't going to be, but I think we should make a strong case that there should be. Perhaps not the same level, like we got 7 million or something last time, but I really think we should put an asterisk on whatever the to-do sheet is we have here to write to our MLA to bring this point up to the government, because, you know, I guess we all thought we'd be all over with when they lifted the emergency a month or two ago, but obviously not with the wave and everything else, the capacities. We didn't go into that phase on September 7th. And the province is the ones that said we couldn't go on that phase. So I think that they weren't going to give us funding this year because they didn't think we'd need it. But it's quite obvious from this exercise, and I think that every municipality is going to need some help in keeping these recreation facilities open. So can we make a note that we write to our MLA, to the or this group that Mark's talking about? We should make a strong point at that association of recreational leaders and get on the province's case. Now that the election's over, we can start focusing on this particular need. And as Councillor Ferguson, I should just mention about the casino, maybe it's a darn good thing we don't have one, because those revenues would have been calculated into their budgets, and there hasn't been those revenues from casinos. But anyway, that's a side point. But I think we should be going after the province for some help here as a result of the PHO orders to reduce capacities in our recreation facilities.
Great. So thanks, Bob. And so so I made a note of it because we're 8 accounts away from grants, and let's make a note there for that advocacy, okay? Because there is a line special for that, but I made a note so we don't forget. Okay. Yeah, we'll get it when we get to specific to recreation. We could do BCPRA. Okay. And then we'll move to next slide, which is rentals and leases. So we're on the revenue side, right, which is has limitations. We all know that. And then we'll get to expenditures, which is really where we want to get to. So Sandra, a quick overview of rental and leases.
So this contains any rental and lease income from any miscellaneous buildings. It includes cell tower arrangements. As well, it includes the recreation revenue that would be curling, ice rink rentals, and pool rentals. So that's different from the service side of it.
Right. So this is kind of the facility stuff. Next slide. So on rentals and leases, any considerations that council wants to see staff look at?
Pretty hard, I guess, to change this when you're competing in the marketplace for the leases for our facilities. But it'd be one thing just to ensure that our contracts are being kept up to date as they're being renewed, that we are competitive in the marketplace, but not falling behind. I think that's the only thing. But I would think staff are already doing that.
Yeah,
So
well,
not much more we
let's
can
put
do
it in.
here. Yeah, unless we,
So making sure contract renewals are competitive. How's that?
sure, yeah,
Yeah,
which,
likely longer term impact. Okay.
that's right.
Uh,
Margaret has a question. Welcome
yeah,
here, Margaret.
great. Hi, Margaret.
Yeah, sorry I was late.
Yeah, no worries.
Anyway, I do have a question. Do we know, like, due to COVID, if we've had any people that are struggling to pay their rent or their leases? Has that been a problem? And does that impact, the budget at all?
Your worship, it doesn't really have that much of a budget impact, but it could. And what I mean by that is our portfolio of properties such as cell towers and things of that nature, or facility rentals where there's no programming, doesn't really suffer from that. Where we have seen it with some of the commercial properties, they fell into an anomaly, and that was that if the landlord was a municipality, they weren't eligible for rent relief. And that's probably the hardest thing that we've seen on some of them, and some have struggled to survive, and some have decided it was time to move on. So it probably has had an impact, but it's been marginal on the township, but probably more significant on the individual businesses.
Thanks, Mark. So if it does occur, it's a minimal when we're looking at almost 3.4 million is what you're saying.
That's correct.
Okay. If Jack or I don't see any hands, and I'm going to keep us moving so that we get to expenditures. Permit and license fees. Sandra?
The bulk of this would be building permits and licenses, but there's also bylaw revenue and burning charges. This budget was just rolled over from the prior year, so there wasn't any adjustments applied to it.
Assumption that everything stays the same. Steve?
A quick question, is it zero increase at all in permit and license, if I may, through the chair?
So the question is, it assumes there's no increase.
There's no increase whatsoever?
Maybe
Yeah,
it's
for
not-
budgeting purposes, it was just rolled over. The same.
So is there any reason for that, or rolling over? The mayor Surrey got rolled over by a car, I know that, but that doesn't affect. I was just wondering, roll over, help me out with that.
So maybe just jumping onto that, if you don't mind, Steve. So I know the purpose that finance has just rolled this over to keep the same, but would there not be an equivalent, even if there was exactly the same number of permits, exactly the same number of building permits, everything was the same, that we could not increase those by 3% or so? I'm just throwing it out there. That might be an idea to throw on there, is a slight increase to go along with the property increase, and then adding that to it is a few dollars.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mark,
It might not matter much, but I mean,
yeah.
I was just curious.
That's a
That's all.
good question.
Well, Your worship,
Yeah.
I think it's a good point, because the restriction is, of course, it's in our fees and charges bylaw, so that requires a review and an update. We do, however, have built into the fees and charges bylaw the provision for allowance of inflation. So there is a possibility that this number could be, rather than simply being rolled over, could be modestly increased, and I think it would probably be in the tens of thousands of dollars, but that's a great point we can take in and factor into our ultimate model.
Well, let's give an X on the probability then. That's every bit's going to count, so that's good. Great, thanks, Mark. Permits and license fees.
Blair,
Anything else?
Blair had a question.
Blair?
Well, it was just a comment, and it was on that. I just wondered why we, that's, I guess, in line with that. It seems to make sense that all of our permits and license fees and other kinds of things like that could be increased by inflation on an annual basis. Why not keep them at least at the inflationary rate? So that would have to be a policy, I guess, at council maybe, but it seems to make sense to do it. So just supporting that.
Yeah, Mark has a comment on that. Mark?
No, thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I think it's important to restate that the bylaw, by recollection, does provide for inflationary increases. I suspect why the number didn't come through is because in the grand scheme of things, it's somewhat marginal. We can certainly check that. I think the real interest is, should we increase them beyond the rate of inflation as a cost recovery mechanism, keeping in mind that we can only we can only recover those equal to the cost of production of the service or the fee or the purpose plus an overhead fee.
Yep.
So I think the real question is, should we be looking at a significant increase in permit and license fees would be the best way to try to qualify this slide, because the background information is there. It's really, do we want to try to raise significant revenue down this category?
Okay. So perhaps for both development management or, which was a previous one, or business licenses, we should be double checking full cost recovery, not profit, but full cost recovery. Is that a fair comment for council?
Yes, yeah, I think that's
Okay.
captures.
And we'll do likewise for back to sales of services, which is where the development management fees would be. So just double checking that these are achieving full cost recovery with an administrative overhead, et cetera. Okay. Or is that development revenue? I'm having a hard time which ones are which, but okay. Let's go to the next one. Development revenue. What's this?
Sandra?
Right. So this is our development revenue from our community development team. And again, like, I think just to clarify, these are rolled over. This is again a second year budget, and it's not necessarily fully reviewed. They're just indicative numbers. So this was rolled over at the same rate and volume.
But what is it?
So it's the development fees.
Oh, so this is where development management fees are.
Yeah.
Okay, not in the sales of services back at recreation. Okay.
Right.
So this would be, okay, so next slide, please.
Steve has a question. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah.
Your mic's on.
Keith, so rather than asking the question time and time again, I think what we can do is just understand the rollover means there could be some inflationary applied, perhaps little, but just for us to understand how that would work when it comes time to making the final or close to making the final decision. Does that make sense with the staff and others? Thank you.
Yeah. And perhaps the more significant aspect is to make sure that it's getting true cost recovery, right? That would be the more significant piece. Okay. Anything else on, transfer from funds. Tell us a little bit about that, Sandra.
So this is our transfer from reserves. So those move around a bit each year depending on what the plan was to use. So this year that CARF means Climate Action Reserve Fund. There was a reduction in that. And there was also last year we had a one-time use of surplus to adjust the tax rate. So that was also taken out this year. So that really is dependent on decisions on use.
Yeah, and if I could jump in, the CARF, the province, the premier, I think it was the premier, had assured us that they're looking for a replacement program. So again, that's not known what that would be, and it'd be hopefully coming in for our 2022. But it was something that was mentioned that they are looking to replace that with something else. So there may be some grant money coming, but we don't know that at this point.
Made a note of that, Jack, when we get to the grant lines. The COVID and CARF. Okay. Any other thoughts? So basically the one time only and that dedicated reserve have been eliminated. Any other thoughts around use of transfer from our own funds? Now, there was the only other factor we did talk about on assumptions or principles. Does council feel that if there was some interim measures required, i.e. an investment or whatever, to achieve a 2022 cost saving, would you be willing to consider use of a reserve?
Anybody? I think I don't see any hands going, but I think we'll consider anything this year. So,
okay.
See, I think everything's
So
on the table.
Maybe we just put it in here for clarity that, last year you may have used the reserve to stabilize the budget or keep it at a certain level. But the use of reserves often can be used to say it's going to cost us a little bit of money to actually get that reduction. And maybe that is, some people are using reserves for that purpose. But
yeah,
okay.
It'd be good, exercise to go through just to see what are discretionary reserves and what can be taken without jeopardizing the future. We have this balancing act we have to do is get through this year at what council directed is a 3% budget, do the best we can, but not jeopardize, the game where we reduce it this year. Next budget has to go up to make up for it. So yeah, I don't think it hurts to look at it. It would be certainly a good review, and maybe we can find something there, but with caution.
And now we've got some stuff that didn't fit anywhere else. You want to give us some insights to that, Sandra?
Yeah, it's essentially is miscellaneous other revenue. A lot of it is admin fees from charges that we charge out to for work orders or the city, or we recover some from school taxes. But again, this is small relatively, and we didn't contemplate any changes.
Okay. And would this be a case where, just a question, that we're confident we are getting 100% of true costs? We have true costs and we're getting 100% recovery?
Probably would need review as well.
Okay. I mean, collectively, if we look at true costs and recovery of application fees, permits and licenses, and other, we may cumulatively have a significant amount, right? Okay. Not seeing any hands, Jack. Investment income. Sandra?
This is just the interest earned on the cash that we're holding. So depending on rates, rates may move up, but we're sometimes holding less cash depending on how we're using our cash on hand and what we have available.
Not investing in cryptocurrency, are you?
Well, apparently a couple places are, yeah. So on investment, no thoughts, creative.
It's always that difficulty in when you invest public funds, ensuring that you are investing it safely, but trying to get the highest return. I know MFA has some funds and that are out there for investment, and I know we look at other investments, but it's a challenge, I think, because it's public funds. Mark or Sandra, do you have any comments on our investments and our strategies?
Obviously, our number one priority is to protect our funds, but and so that does limit it, and it has been, the investment market has been really limited in this last year, so we'll see how that opens up in the next little while.
Jack, you participated in the CEO forum, and MFA presented, their new program. Does MFA's program have any impact on this?
I think so. I don't know where, Sandra has. I'm sure the funds are placed in different buckets depending on when we need those funds. The terms on those funds, but MFA does have some programs, but some of them are quite long term. But the rates are low. I mean, it's very small, and so if we want to chase equities, well, then we take a risk. If we want to chase bonds, then it's lower risk, but more security. So it's that balance, and I'm not an expert in this field at all.
Okay. Next one.
I'd be rich.
You'd be somewhere else.
We'd all be rich if we're experts.
Okay, next one is, we're almost through revenue. We're getting there, everybody. Debt repayment contributions. Tell us a little bit about this one, Sandra.
So this is contributions from DCCs and utilities, so basically from other funds, to pay down the debt that we have, where they are able to contribute to our debt. And it also includes overhead charges on expenses, and it changes as the budgeted expenses change.
So a little bit of a decrease you're projecting here, Sandra.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's based on some of the debt.
Yeah.
That's being repaid.
Yep. Anything on this line item from council? Questions, clarification, ideas? Okay. Next one is special levies and grants. And we'll get an overview, and then this is where we're going to put the COVID advocacy and CARF. So Sandra, you want to give us an overview?
So this is where we bring in the revenue from any of those grant funds. Obviously, the largest chunk change in this is the reduction in the COVID Restart Grant that we received in 2021. The library levy revenue shows up in this line. And then any other grants funding that we have, the most significant would be from TransLink.
Good. So next slide. So this is where we'll start with Bob's idea that advocacy for COVID, right? Not just recreation, but generally. And Jack, I think this is where we would put the CARF, repeat the CARF program. And I think we got Steve.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, so basically, I'm doing some brainstorming right now. We might want to ourselves and also discuss with other community what actually COVID is actually costing community to community, so the public has an idea of what's going on. I know that nationally and federally, they talk a bit about the costs, and they do it in the way of debt. But we can't do a debt because of the way the municipal act, I guess, is structured. Is that a point that staff has considered, if I may, through the chair?
Well, maybe just for clarity, there was 2 points there. One is, do we know the cost impact of COVID? And the second one, just for clarity, is we can't run a deficit, but we can have debt, right? So, okay. Comments, Mark?
Certainly. Thanks, Gord. I guess the cost of COVID is a variable matter. It depends upon things we can't predict in terms of when the health orders are lifted or what stages they're very much at. All communities are coping with that. Comparison to other communities as to strategies or, I guess, philosophies is somewhat helpful, and that goes on through the various connection staff have. The solutions they're all coming up with in many cases are made at home, at home because of their unique circumstances. So facilities are being altered, contracted out, or various things going forward. It's causing a bit of a settling out of the industry, but each one of those really depends upon the direction of the council at the time in terms of how they wish to deal with them. So while relevant, not particularly directive or helpful in terms of the specific challenges we face.
Good. Thank you. So we've got 2 hits then. One is the COVID advocacy. It goes on, and also replacement. And of course, we have UBCM, we have specific associations like recreation, and well aware that actually there is another one, by the way, just I don't know, but when I was in Nova Scotia, there's another push relative to the RCMP settlement as well, to have the federal government be responsible for paying some of that, given how long it took. So I'm not sure if you want to register that one or not.
Yeah, so certainly the UBCM is a good start. I mean, they should be keeping an eye on this. Also the Lower Mainland Local Government Association, because it may have different regional effects, right? I mean, and then Metro Vancouver would be another one. Yeah. Because I imagine, and maybe this, like Steve said, what is the cost of COVID? Is it would be somewhat jurisdictional, I guess.
Yeah.
Perhaps not. Perhaps it's global.
But I think the point is correct, though, Bob. If you're going to advocate for further funding, you need a bit of a business case, right? You need a bit of a assessment of what the impact is. What about RCMP? Is there any interest there to go after funding for that?
Certainly, you brought up a good point.
Probably a new line, Wendy.
Maritimes are looking for it. It's certainly not worth, it's worth throwing it in there. And I think what Bob is alluding to, taking that through UBCM and through some of the other advocacy groups to see if there's some help.
I think most are concerned about, the retro aspect, right? The huge impact. Okay. Anything else on grants or levies? Okay. Next one. Service cost recoveries. And tell us a little bit about this one, Sandra.
So this one is basically just cost recoveries from other parties, which is mostly RCMP and the city of Langley. And really, essentially, there's an offsetting increase in expenses that we're recovering. So it's a one for one.
Okay. And I suspect the same question would be here. Are we confident that we are getting, we have true costs and that we're getting 100% recovery? Any other concerns, questions around service cost recoveries? Now, I'm curious about the next one. External unidentified revenue. That's an interesting name. What have we got there?
So this is just a placeholder budget. So in case during the year we receive some additional revenue, such as donations, et cetera, it has an equal and offsetting expense line. So it has a net zero impact on the budget. Okay.
So if it comes in, it goes out because it's dedicated for a specific reason.
It's just an envelope, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Placeholder envelope.
Okay. So that's probably not got a lot of stuff to it. Okay. And lastly, contributions to, are we on the expense side now? Okay. I think we've just ventured into expense. So I'm going to suggest a 5-minute stretch as we put on our new thinking cap around expenditure reductions. Expenditure reductions involve changing services, changing service levels, changing hours of operation, suspending a service, et cetera. And so this is, as probably most of you realize, is where the bulk of any achievement of 3%.
Okay.
So let's take a quick 5-minute stretch. Let's 11:05, Jack,
Sounds
and we'll dive into expenditures.
Okay.
Before we do that too, because this will take us a bit, just thoughts for lunch at 12 o'clock. Does that suit everybody?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, 12 is good. Half an hour.
And what's our protocol practice? A half an hour, Jack, or more?
Yeah, no more. I think half an hour is
okay.
a lot.
Half an hour, and again, we're not trying to fill the time. Let's just get the work done, and everybody's get on with the rest of the work. Okay.
And then we can all get out early and go to McHappy Day.
Yeah, great. Okay, 10:05.
just see if everyone put their cameras on. Make sure we have everyone back. Just waiting for 3 more. Comes Councillor Woodward, welcome back. Councillor Kuntz, Councillor Long. Councillor Kuntz and then Councillor Long. So take it away, Gord. You hear me coming through now?
Yep. Good to go, Jack?
Yep, we're good to go.
Yep. So we're now on the expenditure side. We have quite a few accounts, but remember there were lots of ideas. I will try and recall them as well that we came up with in July. And so these would be, as we go through, I'll try and highlight, but these were sent out on Monday. The service areas of interest from our workshop July 5th. So let's begin. And again, considerations, ideas, and thoughts, questions, etc. So contributions to capital. Sandra, quick overview.
So this is our contribution to the capital program for the year. It's consistent with the prior year in this budget model. A slight decrease because we had a slight increase in 2021 to fund the Brookswood Library change. So we've just taken that out and back to the sort of more consistent amount.
Right. Next slide, and then we'll go to Steve.
Steve.
Okay, so basically.
On contributions to capital, Steve?
Oh, yeah. So basically, this is quite a large contribution. I'm almost big supporter of it. But under the challenges that we've had, I mean, is there something that we need to sit down with the line entries on those and see which ones we can continue with, or things that we should put on hold, or things we should reconsider? Because every $1 million matters in a budget like this. If I may through a chair, is that a strategy, or everything's solid in gold, so to speak?
Absolutely. So project status would be our first line. Defer, right? Defer or terminate, right? Either one. Okay. So project status, project by project. Okay. Good one, Steve. Bob?
Yeah, well, further to your point, earlier we talked about roads when we had our informal discussion. It may not be a bad time to build capital, so I guess we should be looking at borrowing potentially.
Mm-hmm.
If we, and I think the point I made at the council meetings, if we can somehow show a business case that says, if we borrowed, we're going to save money on future escalated costs. On, for example, we had a good discussion about Yorkson Park. So anyway, I guess borrowing should be in there.
Okay, so let's do, just giving guidance to Wendy as we go so we don't get an idea too big. So project by project status, whether it should be deferred, terminated, that's one line. Another one should be project by project, project and looking at debt options. Is that fair? Okay.
And I think we should write priorities in there somewhere too, because we wouldn't want to just borrow willy-nilly. I guess we have to look at what our priorities are related to the borrowing.
Okay, so that'd be a third bullet, would be making sure we prioritized what absolutely needs to be done in 2022. So that'd be a third bullet, 2022, a good review. Okay, so far we have 3 items. There may be projects that can be deferred. There may be some preventative maintenance is required, but deferred, or in fact no longer needed. We can look at perhaps consider debt options, which lessens the burden on the 2022 budget beyond interest payments, et cetera. And for sure, we need to make sure they're prioritized. Okay, so we got 3 hits on that one. Other observations on, because this is a significant item, right? Any other considerations that?
Maybe Mark, if you want to add some comments. This is, I know we chatted about the contribution to capital. It's a big one, and I think the ideas that have come up already will give some direction to start digging deeper into. But maybe you can give some overview on how deep can we go into this, and just I think Bob had some good comments. If we, there's costs down the road that if we don't do it today, it's cost us more tomorrow. So we're not. So maybe you can just a few comments, Mark.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. These are actually great comments because it helps focus us. For example, the business case may mean that we incur interest costs this year, but we, in future years, eliminate replacing an entire roadbed. An example of that historically may have been Old Yale Road, where perhaps in a few years gone by, the roadbed had been replaced. It would be much more of a manageable project. The debt options are very important to us because that does indicate that there is a willingness to consider that to bring us into balance. That'll be one of the things we can itemize and we can discuss in terms of its priority at a later date. The other thing too is the prioritization. By way of background, this category has been increasing yearly because of council policy and direction to invest more in infrastructure. The paving budget was mentioned. Likewise, though, it's also been a complement or a support for many of the other projects we have, which could be from grants, or it could be from DCC projects where perhaps a DCC project is being funded 75% from DCCs, but it needs some portion from the township. And I guess the other example is, of course, provincial grants, where there may be infrastructure they make grants for. In 232nd Street interchange may be one where we have to actually contribute. So some of these may be built in, but some may not. And of course, relative to all of this is the carry forwards, because if we have a large amount of carry forwards, maybe we can defer a contribution to capital, just leave a gap for a year and then come back to our previous policies and directions, because of course we still are in this post-COVID environment.
So maybe just so we don't lose it, Mark, let's put just correlate with carry forwards, right? Because we're going to look at the carry forwards. So maybe we should just correlate this effort. The other one that we did have from July was, and this is more context, I don't think we could project, but that we would try and approve capital sooner to get ahead of the pack for favorable tenders. So that was another observation you made in July. The final one that came, just a recall from July, was very particular to vehicle replacement, just validating, that on paper number for replacement. So that was another element that was brought up in July. You did bring up climate change, the grant extension, which I think we already have. And I think that was most of the budget items. So it was but vehicle replacement validation, I think, is what came in July. Could you extend the life of the vehicle? Okay, that's I think we're good, Jack.
Yep.
Okay.
No hands.
Transfer to own funds. Give us a feel for that one, Sandra.
So this is transfers into our reserves, and we have a planned increase into the capital infrastructure replacement reserve of $500,000 for this year, and then some other miscellaneous nets against that.
Okay, next slide. So observations, considerations for our own transfer to reserves.
I think this one dovetails into contribution to capital in that how, if we are going to reduce our transfer to our reserves this year is a one year because of COVID, then that's something I think we need to take a look at. So a good analysis of what the reserves are, where they are, balances on the reserves, and what we've historically been putting in, and what we could change this year.
So a temporary reduction.
And Blair has a question.
Blair, thanks.
I guess my thoughts were as well. Maybe it's a 1 year reduction. Maybe even possibly for some reserves, maybe longer term than 1 year. With, I think an assessment of what these reserves are. It seems that there may be some reserves in which we're at the point now where we're building up maybe more in that reserve fund than what we probably need or will need. So I think an overall assessment and analysis of the reserve funds, where are we at today? How much do we need to build up? And could we stop adding to some of them, maybe altogether, or at least for 1 or 2 year hiatus? But I think an analysis of that, because this is another big chunk, just like the contribution to capital between these two areas. I can just imagine we might be able to find some money.
right? Good one, Blair, and that in fact is two different hits. One is the amount is valid. We're just going to temporarily reduce it. The other is, do we need to continue, right? So we'll give it two different hits. Good one. And they're both significant amounts, okay? Any other observations on transfer to reserves? Okay.
I think that's it.
Yep, great. Next one. And municipal grants. Tell us about this one, Sandra. This is an expense, not incoming, it's outgoing.
So this is our grant programming. So we didn't assume any change in what grants we were going to be giving out this year.
And who would these grants go to, Sandra, and then we'll go to Blair? Sandra?
So these are a lot of the community grants.
Okay. So nonprofit organizations, that sort of thing. Okay. Blair, then Steve, and then Bob.
So I recognize it might be a small amount of money, but is this the amount of money that we are budgeting for grants, or is this the actual amounts that we have given in the last couple of years? How much of our budget that we set aside is not actually given out in grants?
This is actually our budgeted amount. I actually don't know the amount that we've given out. That it may have fluctuated in this current year, though, due to the COVID situation, where some of them weren't given out, I think, the last couple of years. So,
right, okay.
A budgeted amount, okay. Steve?
Yeah, I just want to continue with the same question that Blair asked. The fact is, you know, under the situation we're in right now, it may be another opportunity to explore what we're doing and what other community groups are doing and cannot do. That's the thing, cannot do. And they might be keen, but what's workable, what's doable, what's not, and how is that going to benefit the community? And it's always, community groups are always a great benefit, but we have to determine what we're going to do. I know that other communities have cut back on some of their grants, but you'd have to explore that. So that's something we should just explore, how the grants are going and whether we're going to reviewing or not reviewing, and what's going to work for 22 and what may not work. Those are my points.
So community grant review, which would be both the need or the amount. And this was actually brought up in July. There were three thoughts. One, what's the criteria? And I think that's your point. What's the contribution? And are they eligible? Do they really need it? Okay. And are they accountable? So those, okay. Bob?
Yeah, well, I'm hesitant on that because we seem to have done that almost every year for the last 10 years, and we just continue to flog that one. But I would like to know what we actually gave out. I think that was the original question. Perhaps we should have a look at the last couple of years. So rather than actually reducing it or making it harder to apply for, it may be a matter of adjusting it to what the reality is. And don't forget that there'll be the downside to that. I mean, yes, with COVID, there's been fewer opportunities for community grants to be utilized because of COVID. But it's certainly something I wouldn't like to see that we stop encouraging. But the bottom line would be if we budgeted, what was the number, 1-point-something million, and we only spent 600,000 in the last couple of years, and maybe we can find a number in between and save a couple $100,000 there.
Okay. So review.
So we need to know that amount. I think Sandra said she didn't know what it was, but can we not find out, say, the last 3 years?
Yeah.
That way we've got a sort of a pre-COVID idea as well, and then we could maybe take an average out of those three figures.
Okay. So review pre-COVID and COVID, and of course, what we're seeing across the country is, the opposite is nonprofit organizations actually are struggling more now to survive and continue their programs because they're not able to generate revenue. So it's a tough one.
So that's a good question. Do these grants include ongoing nonprofit support? But because our grant program doesn't provide for operating costs or survival costs, it's
Okay.
based upon event and community participation.
Okay.
I think is that not correct? These are the grants we're talking about, community grants, which maybe should be renamed instead of municipal grants, because we certainly give money for operating to child services and social services and other
Museum.
Yeah. So can I
I
get
don't
clarity
know.
from staff? Which ones are we talking about here, or is it all lumped together? If we're talking about the community grants, we should call them those. Is that what this is referring to, and we're calling it municipal grants, or is this community grants plus something else? Does staff know?
This would be our community grant program.
But who are the recipients is, I think, the question.
Well, no, if it is the community grants, then I think we all know that they are members of the community that apply for events
Okay.
and functions within the township that involve, and we already have a fairly strict criteria. My recommendation would be to maybe put community in brackets or take the word municipal out and put community in there instead.
Okay. So really just a follow-up item to relabel. Okay. So we've got the community grant review. In particular, the interest is a larger scale. What was the draw pre-COVID, and what was the draw during COVID? And is there does that reveal something to us? And I didn't hear a lot of heat around re-examining the eligibility / need, etc. at this point. Is that kind of maybe a good idea, but will it in fact impact 2022? Does that make sense? Okay. So anything else on community grants? Look at that, Bob. I've relabeled it already. Okay. Next one is RCMP, special contracts. Okay. Let's dive into this one. I know it was of interest earlier as we were trying to kind of unpack it, and Mark did a good job, I think. But let's give us a quick overview, Sandra.
So this line item, again, it's just a budget at this point. It includes the annualization of the 4 RCMP officers added in 2021. So 1/4 of them was added in 2021, and we need to pick up the remainder of those costs in 2022. Also, per our previous schedule, which can be revisited, we had an additional 2 officers planned for this October, which would be approximately another 100,000. There are regular cost increases for the officers of about 600,000. Again, these are very round at this point. And then we know that the contract settlement is coming, and it has not been fully costed yet, but we're estimating, I've put in an estimate here of an additional 300,000. We're waiting on further guidance on that one.
Right.
Good overview. Questions, comments?
Margaret, yeah, and then Blair.
Yeah, I think my question was actually related to that last line there, the 1% increase in pay. So is that retroactive for the 3 years of all our RCMP members then? Is that, did I understand that correctly from the media that was what they were asking for?
This was assuming how it will impact our contract as it stands for next year. The retroactive pay is different, which we have been accruing some liability for. So again, we'll have to see where that comes out.
Okay, so that's not in this particular line. Okay, thank you.
But a good pickup, Margaret, because as we go to the next page, we should be looking at RCMP retro impact, right? That's an advocacy item. This is a big concern all across the country. This is there's a retro impact that's huge. Yeah. Blair.
Yeah, my question is just for some clarification. So we understand maybe if we go back to the last slide, the last slide talks about having annualization of 4 RCMP officers in 2021. We had a discussion early in this term about adding 10 officers. So I'm assuming this is 4 of the 10. And then the addition of 2 officers in October, is that another 2? Do we need to still consider adding annualization of 4 more officers at some point? Or did we already do that and add them in 2020? I'm just trying to get clarification for where we're at with the 10 RCMP officers that we discussed as a council and have discussed over the last couple of years. Maybe, I don't know if either Sandra or Mr. Backen can help us with this.
Thank you, Your Worship. By my recollection, I'd have to test it, I think they've begun to work them well. Well, they're more than begun. They're actually concluding their way through the system. I think the 4, as I recall, was a 4-4-2, and I think the 4 is what you see on the first line, and then the 2 were what's, again, really per our original plan, but it was built into the system to say that we would continue to then go forward at a 2 per year number. And as Sandra has pointed out, then we are, I guess, annualizing and including that direction, and we could look at not continuing to add or postponing. And the other thing I was simply going to add was that the historical, I guess, the lump sum increase that's coming through the system, we've allocated that separately. It's in a bit of a different packet, so it shouldn't affect our ongoing rate if we've collected enough. But if we haven't collected enough, it could impact us, but we could try to use some of the RCMP surplus for that if that was feasible.
Mark, am I hearing, just so we're clear and record it, am I hearing a strategy in there that we should be putting on the next slide?
I think we may want to confirm our previous strategy, and I think we can separate the retro impact because it is something that we had anticipated.
Okay, so confirm previous strategy. Okay, good. Just so we don't miss that. Blair, anything else, Blair?
No, I think that's good for now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just jumping on the confirmed previous strategy, I think certainly we recently have a new superintendent taking over the detachment. It'd be good for him to be part of that review to see if those extra are needed this year, or if there is some way that we can defer those extra. So being that COVID, but we do have a new superintendent, so he should be involved in that review.
Okay,
thanks.
So let's make a note of that. Just bracket new superintendent. Okay, a good one, Jack. Not seeing any other hands. Okay, so next one is service and maintenance costs. Tell us a little bit about what this is.
So this is a pretty large bucket of miscellaneous costs. Obviously, a lot goes into this, but some of the highlights of the increases that are captured in this year would be the planned $500,000 increases in road paving contribution. There's a new community police office coming on. So that's about $380,000 in lease costs. And then other than that, there are various facility maintenance contracts that are required, and there's inflation included in those. And I think, as we pointed out earlier, we're not sure whether there's enough inflation in those based on how the inflation's going. We'll have to revisit that. And then there's specific park contracts required with inflation, and stormwater are some of the other big areas where we end up with increases.
So you've got two discrete amounts, paving in the new office, and the rest sounds, for the majority, inflation related. Steve, then Bob.
Well, I guess obviously this will be something, it's such a large expansion. I mean, it could be line entries, could be in process or happened already, or again, putting forward to another year. I mean, this is something where we obviously have to, especially when we're looking at a budget of 3%, we have to really look hard at all the line entries and where we could save or whether we can't save, but that's something we have to look at. Thank you.
Is there anything specific, Steve, that for guidance for staff? Any particular area?
It's a matter of fact, yeah, I'd probably like to look at the main points of $30 million and what we used to have a large booklet we used to look at and what we could do and what we could not do, what we could put over or we could hold off on. We've got a lot of roads, as you know, in the township of Langley, and it's pretty hard to cut back on that. But there's many things that we could look at, and under the circumstances, there'd be line by line entries and see where we could look for or produce savings, or else grants or other things from other parties. But those, I think we have to take a hard look at that.
Okay, so nothing specific comes to mind.
So the specific things would be the line by line entries. I don't have them in front of me, but I would certainly like to look at those.
Okay, Blair?
Yeah, I had understood that the paving budget was part of the contribution to capital. So maybe I'm just confused, but I thought I heard them say earlier that paving roads was part of that budget. So I'm guessing that maybe the capital is for building new roads. Is that what the money in there is for, versus paving, which is in the maintenance? So I wanted that clarification, I guess, first of all. And then the second thing was just some maybe some comments maybe from Mr. Backen about the maintenance contracts, and what is the process we go through in evaluating whether those maintenance contracts are of good value, and whether or not we should, at their expiry, move to maybe bring it in-house or outside of us, or, those kind of decisions, or whether we do things externally based or internally based with our own staff, and how is that process done to evaluate the effectiveness of these contracts, and just some comments around that.
Let's start with the road question. And Mark, who's taking a shot at that?
I'll start off, and Sandra.
Sorry, can we see the previous slide? Because I've kind of lost the context on that.
Great. Thanks, Bob.
No,
So the road paving, is that already included somewhere else, or is it additional?
So I think what we're seeing, Gord, is that we would actually see it on the revenue side. It would be something that we'd actually be seeking to get additional revenue for that purpose. Once that revenue is raised, it then goes out to be an expense. And generally, we would be contracting with a company to deliver the road paving that we're doing, the supplemental road paving. The budget for road paving itself would be well in excess of $500,000. That's just the incremental increase, and that's what's being reflected in the expenditure increase, or a part of it. The community police office, of course, is something that we previously had determined that we would be proceeding with by way of a lease as opposed to construction. So that's simply bringing into that number what we'd previously had done or contracted to do. And that's probably a good segue before the final question. These, in many cases, simply represents a combination of all of our service and maintenance contracts where we employ third-party contractors to perform the work. That process to perform the work is traditionally done on a tender, request for proposal basis through the public tendering processes and policies. What you're seeing then is some of those would be for a year, some could be over multi-year depending upon the terms of the original tender. So there is some ability to deal with those based upon the performance of the contractor. Generally speaking, we have, as was asked, well, how do we ensure we're getting good value for dollars? The managers that are looking at these issues have a process to review the contractor's performance, depending upon the nature of the issue, anywhere from a quarterly to yearly basis, depending upon the type of contract we're dealing with. Built into that as well as public feedback. An example might be in the garbage contracts, where we contract out some of the garbage requirements to a private entity. All of those then lead us and wrap us back up to the analysis and, well, what is a better way of doing it, contracting in or contracting out? And generally, if it's a cost perspective, if it's purely cost perspective, it can be a contracting out. If it's a quality of service or control perspective, then contracting in comes into it, because sometimes you can get a little bit of higher level of service, or you can get some more direct control over things, of course, but that comes at a cost, and that's the balance we're always wrestling with. The township, and as you're seeing, spends a significant amount of its resources on service and maintenance contracts because it overall has a lesser cost impact because of, for example, for the contractor, you don't pay for statutory holidays, Whereas under our collective agreements, we do that, as we're seeing with September 30th, which is deemed to be federal statutory holiday under the collective agreements.
Okay, well, that's helpful. What I'm hearing you say is that if we were to move some of these contracts to being more internal, it's possible we might have better service, but from a budgetary perspective, the cost would probably go up. So that's what I'm hearing you say. The road paving one, I'm still a little confused on, so maybe I asked the question incorrectly. I thought that the increase of $500,000 in road paving was already covered in the contribution to capital on the expense side, that we were already in that section looking to add money to the paving budget. I thought that's what I had heard. And so I'm wondering if did I hear that correctly? And if so, then it seems like it's in two places, but maybe I heard incorrectly, and maybe the additional $500,000 in road paving is just in this section, and maybe it's not in contribution to capital, but that's not what I thought I heard earlier.
Oh, well, thank you. Sandra, perhaps you can refresh us then, because I think the point is it's appearing as a expense and contribution to capital, and then also an expense here in the service and maintenance contracts. How do we reconcile those two numbers?
So contribution to capital would be for capital paving projects, whereas this is our ongoing maintenance of paved surfaces.
Like patching, repairs?
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So were we I mean, thinking a couple of years ago, were we looking at putting $500,000, increasing the budget by $500,000 annually in both road paving, this category, and also in building of new roads, which would be in the capital? Is that correct? 500,000 in each of those areas related to roads?
My understanding is it was just in this area that we were trying to increase it 500,000 a year.
Okay, the contribution to capital number for paving has remained the same, is what you're saying. Okay.
Okay.
Mark has a comment.
Okay, so before we go there, though, let's take a look at this. Let's go to the next page. Then, does council want to be looking at the $500,000 lift for road pavement maintenance? Right? Do we want to look at that, or is that?
I think we should look. I think we should look at it.
Okay. So let's review.
I'm not saying that we should not do it. I mean, I've always been supportive of us adding it, because I think we're short on the amount of money we need for maintenance. But in light of the budget situation we're in, I think everything should be on the table.
Okay. Bob?
Yeah. Well, okay. Now I'm concerned about that one, because climate change, or whatever you want to call it, more severe winters, more severe weather events mean that we need, to continue to fix up the roads. And I think we said earlier in the conversation, if we don't fix them now, it's going to cost more later. So in other words, if you maintain the road as much as you can, it's going to reduce the need for capital to redo a whole new road. So this is a tough one, because you might be robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of a thing there. But I think that the thing that's misleading all of us perhaps is where it says road paving. So that really shouldn't say road paving. It should say $500,000 in road pavement maintenance,
surface,
which it does say on the top line, I guess.
Yeah. It's surface, it's potholes, right? It's steel crack, etc. Why don't we just put that over X under possibility then? So that it's under possibility, not probability.
Yeah, I would put a possibility as well.
Yeah. Wendy, the next column.
Because wouldn't that be weather dependent? Like if we had a really bad winter, we're going to need the money. And we now have a report a pothole program, and I don't know about the rest of you councilors, but I get calls constantly about areas.
So it's a little bit, it's a tougher one. Okay. Now, it's a huge amount. So what we're hearing is that a lot of the contracts are 1 year or plus. And even though we might look at contracts and value for money, I'm not hearing, unless staff find some, that there's anything magical for 2022. Okay. So these are all contracts. Is that right? Are these like custodial contracts? They're all contracted.
All contracts.
Okay. Okay. Anything else for contracts that council wants staff to take a look at? Okay. Next one. So salaries, wages, and benefits. Sandra, give us a quick overview.
Okay, again, this one has some additional things that we put in just for discussion purposes. There's the annualized 2021 additions that we had last year, some of them for half year and some were for a quarter of the year last year. So we've annualized those. It's about 180,000. We were bringing back the recreational salaries that we had reduced to 50% of the COVID reduction. 50% of the reduction is coming back in this year. Sorry to clear that up. We did add some additional staff for fire just as a placeholder, as we knew that that may be an issue this year. There's some additional staff required for the tree protection bylaw that we've been discussing. And then every year we end up having some additional staff impact due to some of our construction projects as they come online. And in this particular year, we're showing parks and stormwater and roads. Now, those ones haven't been finalized. These are just carries from last year. So those will come out as the staff look at their budgets.
So these last 4 are based on just some preliminary discussions of council. Is that right? No. Well, the additional tree protection, these are more speculative compared to the first one. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
We may have to relook at the recreation salaries though, based on what's happening.
Okay. Well, in fact, then the 5 bullets beyond the first one are just simply hunches of where council might be heading. Okay. Bob, you're first.
Well, I'm sorry to do this, but can we go back just for a second to the paving? Because I hadn't completed my thoughts on that, so I even missed this.
The paving? Sure. Absolutely,
It's
Bob.
just a comment. I don't know if we have any experts out there, if Mr. Safey's there or whatever, but I think we brought this up over the years, is looking at the way that we patch and do road repairs. Are we doing the traditional, throw the cold patch down, run it over and hope it stays, and probably a couple of weeks later it lifts up? Or are we looking into the new technologies? And I don't know if that's going to help us, save money, because it might cost more. But my understanding is that there are better ways, or different ways, or more high-tech ways to do some pavement maintenance. And I just hope that we're looking at those. I'm sure we are, but I just wanted to make that mention.
Well, let's make a note of it. Road patching technology. How's that?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And it may be more of a later impact, but nevertheless worthy. Okay. Good one.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
That's okay. And hey, this is your day. So if someone thinks of something from 5 slides back or 5 lines back, no problem, right? Thanks. So now we're on salaries and wages. And if we can just go to that overview again, just to summarize. So we have the first bullet is, again, we need confirmation that, these were things that were done and they're being annualized. And the next 5, if I've got it right, are really just hunches, projections based on council. Well, the COVID is basically an estimate, but the other additional are not confirmed by council at this point. They're just placeholders. Okay. Steve.
Long and right.
Next slide, Wendy.
I think Councillor Long's right. You don't have to go back a slide. I think the paving, there's a number of ways of doing it. You don't want to leave a pothole or a hole in the road too long, but you can patch it and protect it up until the time that you can need to pave over there or do a paving construction. There's a tougher way. But the last thing you want to do is leave it, because it's going to cause irreparable damage, cost more. But I mean, as long as we stay on top of that stuff so we can get in the future. Though there are techniques, and I think Councillor Long headed to that. We have to watch every dime and nickel, it sounds like, in the future until we're over some of these challenges. I think we have to look at all 6 of those points and review each one and see how things come in part-time, full-time, how they're put over to another year, and how they're looked at. So those are things that we will have to really roll up our sleeves on. Thank you.
So, so just we get clarity around what you're suggesting. Back to the previous slide, Wendy. Sorry. You're saying that the additional fire, that I think that's the Monday discussion, additional staff, tree protection, the additional staff due to, new new properties coming online. Those 4 should have a business case.
Looked at. I mean, maybe
Okay.
the tree protection arborist, we're into, depending on how far we get along in the budget, that might be, what they call, you start off half the year or 3/4 a year or something. What would that look like? And including the digital media specialist. I mean, I can improve my look, I know that, but it would take an awful lot. But I mean, all those things could be phased in or put over to another budget or part-time. And there's a lot of different ways of doing this. Same with the fire is how that's implemented and at what cost and at what time. All those things can be looked at and reviewed. We say yes, no, or maybe.
So I'm going to stop you, Steve, just for a minute, because if we say everything, then so let's go back. I want to be very specific in our guidance. The tree protection arborists, Mark, they were hired last year, and this is now the annualized cost.
I don't know if they were hired. This is part of an ongoing initiative that I think is being implemented as we speak. So just to put this in, step back one step, Gord. This is a big number, but it's a big number because it includes our union contracts where there may be a 2% escalation clause each year. So when one looks at that, then if one has a $100 million union contract, $2 million is where you start from as being your base. Now, of course, we can see that 2.3 over 90 is slightly higher than that, and that's where you come to these bullet points down below. And as was referenced then, the service enhancement was for tree protection and the associated things that go along with that were approved. So I agree with you. I guess the question would be, that's been an approved direction of council. Would the direction be to revisit that or not? That would be the question, and I'll leave that for the moment.
So let's go to each one, just so we don't get too many balls in the air. Is council interested, since the arborist has not been hired, to relook at that position?
Just a point of order. Didn't council make a motion to actually do that? Right, when we had these revisions to the tree bylaw, it included new technologies. So we'd have to go back and undo a motion that's already been made. Am I correct or not?
So, Your Worship, that would be probably the correct point. The question would be, has it been acted upon? And Mr. Seff, you might know if we've actually, where we're at in the process of procuring arborists and bylaw officers and whatnot for that.
If I might just continue before you do, that wouldn't just change this amount, it would change the whole tree protection bylaw, because the changes that were made, made it much more work. So you have to have the workers. So you can't change the work program and not hire the people to do the work, I would think.
Yeah. Well, let's let staff comment. Yeah, and definitely those are some points, but anything and everything on this budget, council could review if they wish, but you're right, there are underlying motions and bylaws that have happened over the last year, which without a real change in direction, staff have to provide the staffing. But I think Raman has some comments on all of this, and then we should get back to the speakers list. Thanks.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just very briefly on the previous discussion, Your Worship, just to hopefully provide some clarity rather than add potential confusion. Accounting terminology aside, typically we have 2 types of road construction works. One categorized as operating or falls under operating, which is paving, and then the other, which is capital construction, is reconstructing the road, which includes typically the road base and sub-base because of the age or the condition of the road. And the second point, to, I guess, address Councillor Long's concerns, we do employ the latest standards, latest technologies. We have, in recent years, been fortunate to develop an asset management department where staff look at all most modern technologies and standards to make sure that we minimize our costs and maximize the life of our assets. And finally, Your Worship, in terms of the process that we have begun to act upon council's direction, we have hired the arborist, and in the process of hiring additional bylaw enforcement staff to go with that. So I guess depending on how you look at it, it has been acted upon.
Right. That's great clarity. So they're already in play, and there's not a potential to defer, delay, etc. Okay, so, and on the engineering technologists and digital media specialists, where are we with that one? Mark?
Mark Raman? I don't know.
Or somebody?
I think it's mostly Raman, so he's looking it up.
Yeah. He's just
Okay.
the engineering technologist.
Okay, so while they're doing that, so we have the additional fire, which, if I've got it right, Sandra, is the presentation made this week. Is that right? Mark, somebody?
We're just waiting for Sandra to come online, but I think Raman may have a comment as to the previous one.
I can advise that we have commenced the process. I'm just checking with staff to find out where
Sure.
we're at in the process.
Yeah, thank you.
So Gord, yeah, my only point was the fact that you're right, I said 6. If we've made a motion to decide, I just was wondering if it's going to be January 1st, it'd be February 1st, because that all comes down to percentages. That would be 100%, 90%, 80%, just so we
Sure.
know, and it's a clarification. The same thing on the additional fire, that decision has not been made. We may indeed make that decision, but that might not come on until part of the 2022. I don't know where. And the same thing goes on all those other, at what percentage of the year or do we need the budget for? And we determine that accordingly. That's where I'm coming from.
Okay, so next slide. Let's give it a double hit. If we go to next slide. One would be the rationale for new positions. And we've said this before, any new position needs a business case, number one. And number two would be timing. Is that fair, Steve? So can it be phased in, et cetera? You know, and again, part-time, contract, full-time, okay? I'm hearing that the arborist is in place, so we've already got a commitment, you know, arborist and clerk and enforcement, and that would require a major backing up to a previous bylaw, right? So I'm not hearing any desire to look at that. And so the rationale for new positions would be for fire, tree protection, and there was one more, I forget what the third one was. Okay. And anything else on staffing?
Got Blair, I think Blair and Bob. So
Yeah. Oh, great. Thanks, Jack. Blair?
Yeah, just comment on the tree protection. The first item that was there, the arborist that was mentioned, that's already in play. That was really to deal with the bylaw as it existed prior to us making the changes. Those were necessary to actually enforce the bylaw and have us move along in the tree protection bylaw. Subsequent to that, we've adjusted now the tree protection bylaw. We've made new changes to it, and those are now in force as of now. We just had a meeting last night saying that it's already in play and people can apply under the new bylaw. And that's where the new staff, the discussion is. So it's possible we could delay them and timing could be there, but recognize that the new tree protection bylaw is in play right now. It's already started. So if we delay, it just means we can't enforce. So I think in many ways, council made the decision when they decided to change the bylaw. They made the decision to add to the budget. That you can't really do one without the other. So I think it's important that we recognize that. The fire is a different one, so I just don't think that the tree protection is speculative because we've actually already passed it and it's already happening. It's not speculative.
Good point. And so the two, if we can go back to the previous slide, and then we'll go to Bob. So the speculative one would be the tree protection. The fire, and even the last two are not necessarily speculative. If you build new parks, they have to be maintained. If you add new stormwater and roads, they have to be maintained. So there's a lift in staffing requirements. But regardless of the reason, what we're hearing, any additional staff would still need a business case. Okay, Bob.
That makes sense.
Yeah, well, you know, we're having a nice time here, but this is just it. When when we have a motion that says we're only going to raise taxes X% when we don't even know what the budget is, and yet we have another motion that says we're going to increase the budget. So that's an issue. But I really like to have some clarification on this additional staff fire, because Gord, you said about the presentation Monday. So is this in or out of this potential, the document that you sent us yesterday? Is the fire in there? The additional staff? I know that we haven't made a decision on it. We have referred it to the budget process. So is it in? When it's, in other words, those four, well, like you just said, Gord, some of those are obvious, but are these bullet points in that 2.382 million?
Mark or Sandra, but start with Mark.
We'll have to divide this answer up. So Sandra, the fire, can you provide any clarity as to the fire in terms of whether it's previous or if it's the ones from the delegation?
This was based on information we assumed was coming with the delegation. So we just wanted to take last year's budget, add in anything that might come out of it to give discussion points.
So there is no money
Yes,
then.
it is in those numbers on that schedule.
So how much then in those numbers would those positions be? $400,000? Is you can give a number?
Well,
Sorry,
rather
I was on mute. I believe it's $600,000. It's just a placeholder. Right?
Okay. So there is a placeholder for fire, which was the delegation this week. It's just a placeholder.
All right.
And it would still require a business case to come to substantiate that, but it wouldn't be an additional lift. Let's go through each one. Additional staff for tree protection, which is beyond what's already been approved in 2021, the tree protection arborist and support clerk. Tell us about that. What is that?
Mark or Sandra?
So that was again, that's added in those numbers, but wasn't in the original 2022 budget. It's estimating 2 arborists and 1 support person for about 300,000, I believe.
Okay, so that's above and beyond the first bullet, which is already in play. Okay, and the next 2 items are simply staff increases related to more areas to maintain. Is that correct?
Correct, Gord. There's a formula that actually
Right.
applies through to say those, and in many cases, these are funded either from the capital program, i.e. if there's a project, we take some of that project and allocate it, or if it's for a purpose, the stormwater fund, for example, could have some allocations and it's automatic. So while those are certainly relevant, they're not big impacts on the number that's at the top of the page.
Okay, so next, let's go back to our working slide then. So right now where I'm hearing council is 1, the rationale for any new position, even if it's looks solid, that we just got to make sure it's very clear. And as well, even if it were to be approved, some consideration around timing, part-time, full-time, timing, part of the year, etc. Huge amount. So any other targets, any other areas that council wants staff to look at when it comes to staffing, wages, and
It's certainly one just to comment on it. It's collective agreements. It's difficult to not a lot of wiggle room in there. I think certainly these new positions, as it says in the motion, business case. If we're going to increase that, over the 3%, because hiring these positions, that requires that business case. So very hard to get wiggle room in the rest of them unless we were to cut. And I don't know if there's a desire for that because we want to maintain services to our residents. So I think that's takes us through. So it's just about noon. I don't know if you wanted to break. And I was going to suggest that we take our half hour, but we come back and work right through till the finish. Mark.
And we've got 12 accounts, so I think very doable.
Yeah.
So we'll reconvene, Jack, 12:30.
Mark has a point.
Your worship, the lunch has been delayed by about 15 minutes, so we should probably go to 12:15, then take the 30-minute break.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, good.
That's new information I didn't have.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
So you don't want to be wasting your time. All right.
Well, my lunch isn't delayed. Oh my gosh.
You get to eat it there. All right, we'll carry on then. Thanks. Go on
Yeah.
to consulting professional services. And
Sandra.
you don't want us to touch this, the next one. Gord.
I knew you were going to go there.
Okay.
So obviously in this year, we have an election, so there's costs moving into this project. And the majority of this should be funded by the reserve that's been set aside for this. My understanding is these costs may be increasing. We're just working on those numbers now.
So the increase of 300,000 is for the election, and that we do have a reserve that covers that off, is what you're saying.
So it's self-funded. Sandra? Did we lose Sandra?
I don't know.
Okay. Mark, if it's an expense, it doesn't impact our operating, right?
Correct. The contribution, technically speaking, the contribution each year would impact it. There should be enough money in the reserve to cover it, so we may see an incremental increase in our contribution for the next election, but that would be over a 4-year period.
Okay. So overall, in consulting / professional services, give us some insight. What does that look like? Is that architects, external engineers? Is this legal? Is this financial, the audit? Am I close?
That you got the right categories there.
Okay. Okay.
And Gord, while they're the right categories, just to intervene, the increased expenditure Wendy advises me is really for the election itself. So the others are very close to status quo. There's going to be some slight variations, but they're not going to be very large.
Okay, great. Next slide. So for council, is there any areas that you would want staff to take a closer look at relative to engineering, architects, legal, financial?
I think these are, again, it's hard to predict. These are ones that flow through. If there are actions brought up against the township, then they have to be defended, and it costs money. If there's other actions, it just seems to average out over the years, and hopefully nothing huge comes to this, and then usually insurance companies take over. But it's hard to adjust these. Yeah. I can't think of anything unless somebody else can come up with something. But I know our staff do the best they can to minimize these costs. But it's in the nature of the business that we have.
Mm-hmm. Okay, not hearing any. Equipment and vehicle rental. Give us, this is not replacement, that was different. So Sandra, a quick overview.
So this one is what it is, equipment and vehicle rental. We have that in many areas for equipment that we require. So there are general inflationary increases in here. And again, those probably are not adjusted. We'll see where those come at the end of this year as we roll up budget. But there is impact from, again, the addition of capital construction in parks and park programs, and those in transportation as well each year that we're implementing. And we did add into this budget, due to the tree protection bylaw, we did add in an additional vehicle in this rental in this to cover that off.
Great.
Yeah, and I might add, I just heard, when they're talking about inflation in Canada, that new vehicles and the rental is actually the lease, which would be impacted by the new vehicle costs, have gone up 7%. When they're talking about some of the inflationary effects of COVID and the supply chain, we're seeing some large increases. So that's probably not in this, but it's something to be aware of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure, it's huge. The lack of chips for cars. Car production, so car rentals have gone up everywhere. Yeah.
Bob has a question.
Bob?
Yeah, I mean, this one we pick on every year. And my understanding is that we have a really solid program. Maybe we can have a renew of the business case. So it sounds good. Okay, instead of buying that truck for $100,000 this year, let's put it off. You think you're saving $100,000, but if it's a lease return, and I'm sure someone's already done all the math on whether in the long term you're saving or not, because it might just appear to be a saving, and it sounds good. Hey, we should drive that truck another year. But I think when you do the analysis, it ends up costing you more at the end of 10 years or whatever. So that, the wear and tear on the vehicles, the reselling price of the vehicle, features in terms of, I'm not trying to be an apologist for our leasing guys, but I do believe that they've got that covered. Yet it's something that council pounces on every year because it's an easy one. A couple $100,000 for a truck. Wow, we've cut the budget, but at the end of the day, it might have cost us $300,000, and you might lose efficiency and safety and all that stuff. So I don't know if staff has a comment about that, Mr. Safety, perhaps, just to help us there before we pick on this one.
Yep, Raman.
I'm sorry, Your Worship. I've been caught red-handed. I was multitasking. Could I ask Councillor Long to to kindly repeat the question?
Just tell us. Tell us how wonderful your vehicle replacement program is, so that council doesn't say you can't buy that truck.
Thank you, Councillor Long. Thank you. As per my earlier comments in terms of asset management, I think over the years we have been perhaps unsuccessfully trying to assure council that the asset management program that we have, including our fleet replacement policies, take a look at each type of vehicle and make sure that the proceeds from the sale correspond to, I guess, the life expectancy and maximizes our revenues in terms of replacement of our assets. That includes the fleet. I hope that answers Councillor Long's question.
Right. And of course, this is rental. This is not capital replacement, right?
Just 1 second though, Gord. I think this is the capital. I think this is actually the equipment and vehicle rental. So this is the equipment reserve. Raman's nodding yes.
Okay.
Associated with that as well, keep in mind for council, this includes things like fire trucks and as well police cars. It's not merely the engineering vehicles that we've focused on. It's a broader amount. The concerns previously expressed, I think, were more as to could we take your average dump truck or pickup truck, extend its life by a year, and therefore would that lead to less overall costs, because we could actually run it. And I think what Raman has tried to summarize is that, in fact, by doing so, the maintenance and operating costs of that vehicle for that additional year often exceed the incremental saving, because when you have a new vehicle, it doesn't have those costs, and you get the depreciation element for the first year that probably makes it a better business case to try to replace on a regular basis.
Yeah, and there's reserves that cover off a lot of these, like the fire trucks are reserves. The some of the other police vehicles, that sort of thing, they're rotating through and reserve. You have reserves put aside for them annually.
Yeah, I suppose it would be helpful if you saw the amount and knew how this links to the revenue, right? To know the true impact. Yeah. Okay.
Good.
Anything else on equipment? So it sounds like it's equipment purchase and vehicle rental. Anything previously we had just simply said, and I think Raman made the point because it comes up, around rationale for equipment replacement versus extension. Next one. Materials and supplies. Give us an overview, Sandra.
Again, this will feel very much like a catch-all of all of these types of things that we purchase as a municipality. So there are general inflationary increases included in here. Again, some of which we're probably not maybe reflecting where we are at in today's world. We'll see how that comes about at the end. And then we have the impact of some of the capital construction in parks and additional park programs and some of the additional transportation programs. So, but really it is a catch-all for those expenses.
Any examples of what materials and supplies means for $7 million?
So we would have automotive supplies, communication supplies, concrete and asphalt, sort of the
Office
list goes on and on.
Yeah, okay.
Your worship,
So
just to help on that concept, of course, there's the supply of material in bulk, but the best example are usually culverts and the things that you'll see at the end of ditches. What we would see is those have a certain cost associated with it. They're not broken up by division. They're broken up simply by the fact they're materials and supplies. And what we've forecasted, I think, is basically status quo with some general inflationary increases and any known projects that might, any known maintenance projects, not capital projects, but maintenance projects that may involve those.
Okay. And and some of these would be offset by capital? Or these are all net costs?
These are the net maintenance items, so if it was a capital program, it'd be within that, but this would be
Right.
a culvert collapse.
Repairs, replacement.
Yes.
Okay, good clarity. Because it's always good to know when there's a revenue source, but in this case, there wouldn't be. So good clarity. Okay. So for council, any thoughts around purchasing of materials and supplies?
No, I think it's
Pretty straight up.
smart.
Okay. Okay. Next one we have talked about before, which is debt. Previously we had talked about, and it is in fact a priority of council, to look at your debt management strategy and policy. That's just a bit of backdrop. Sandra, you want to tell us a little bit about the $1 million increase here?
So this again just came out of the 2022 roll forward budget from as presented in 2021. So we have put in a placeholder for additional debt, principal, and interesting servicing. So that will go up and down depending on direction from council.
And we already have then under, I think, contributions to capital or capital projects, the need to look at and consider debt options. And Blair, so maybe we could put that on.
I just had a question that just might be helpful for us on council. I'm assuming it happens on a regular basis, but is there a process that we look at in ways that we could maybe restructure our debt in a way that might help us manage our budget? It seems interest rates seem to be getting lower, and it's a good time to borrow, but it might be a good time to restructure debt. I just don't know how that's done, and it might be informative for council to understand the process that staff goes through in looking at things like that.
Okay. So maybe we just put that on the next slide. Examine debt restructuring might be, and again, we'll come back, staff can come back with some of these to say, well, wouldn't have a big impact, that kind of stuff. These are just ideas. So that was Blair. Jack, not seeing anybody else.
Pretty much it. Yeah, a lot of these, loans are established. They have terms, and when they do renew, we look for the best you possibly can, and not easy to get out of them. But so they do have restrictions on it, but certainly worth looking at. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Next one is probably before lunch is communication and technology. So tell us what's inside here a little bit. Looks like a minor increase.
So this is all of our technology costs. And yes, it's just some contract increases that we have that are showing up in this line.
So those are IT, modern communication, hardware, software, that sort of thing?
Yeah, the service contracts, the software, yeah.
Cybersecurity, et cetera. Okay. Any thoughts around communication technology that council wants staff to consider to take a closer look at?
They keep changing cell phones every year, so I guess we're going to keep spending.
Yeah. Now, is that lunch I smell, or shall we
No,
continue?
not yet. Okay,
No problem.
we may get through all this. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, there you go. Other supplies and expenses. Yeah, and I think, for our final round, we'll just go round table, period, just open season and see if there's anything Other supplies and expenses. Sandra?
So the increase on this one is actually the collective bargaining provision and the increases for all of our contracts. So because they're not settled contracts, we collect them in this line item as opposed to in the salaries line item because they're not confirmed. So this would be where the QP incremental increase would be for the year.
So the 7 million, for example.
Well, it will have other items in there as well, but the increase will be due to the
Oh, okay. Oh, so the 1.6
settlement.
is because of the undetermined settlement, but there are other items in here. What would those other items be in here? Other supplies. What would?
It's like conferences.
Oh, yeah. So all of the sort of subscriptions, conferences, training, travel. It's kind of those things that aren't that are more administrative overhead type of supplies.
Okay, helpful. So when it comes to other supplies and expenses, is there any target areas that council would like staff to consider? Maybe it looks like.
Can I make a comment, Gord? When I looked at the list that you sent yesterday, and now with this explanation, it means a whole different thing to me if the contract expenses are in there. So perhaps we could put that in parentheses that you know, and wage expenses, because others that aren't at the meeting here, when they look at the chart that you sent out, they're going to say, well, what the heck's with the deal with, you know, increasing supplies and expenses? Like we shouldn't buy that many pens or something like that. But when you realize it's the bargain, there's nothing we can do about that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose there's always a fear when you collapse things so much, you don't know what they are anymore. So I think out of that, Bob, your observation is
wage in there.
Yeah, just look at the look at these account summaries to make sure the title is correct, because I think we've changed about 3 of them so far.
Thank you.
Okay, just so they're a little easier to navigate. Okay. And maybe just make a note there, Wendy, to look at the labels, right? Just so they're clear. Because remember, by the time you see the budget, I mean, you're going to be going deeper, right? There's accounts after accounts coming after that. Okay. So when it comes to, well, let's just call it, other than, you know, a holding area for union settlements, any other areas for attention relative to purchasing? Okay.
Oh, sorry to be picky, but can we put the word union in there?
Yeah.
Union wage expenses, because Mark's not getting a wage, right? A raise?
No, I think it's all, Mark, go ahead.
It's actually more than just union. It's all staff that could be impacted by your worship, not senior staff, but all staff could be impacted.
Okay, well then we just leave it, I guess. Thanks.
Yeah, I think the only one that's not included in there is council, actually, Bob. Anyway, okay.
All right.
How are we doing for lunch?
Still keep going. We might get this
Okay.
done.
You'll let me know. I won't keep.
Oh, we'll let you know. I'll ring the.
Okay.
5 minutes. I'm told now. I'm told 5 minutes.
Okay. Utility user fees. So I gather this is Langley's, the township's use of electricity, natural gas, etc. So pretty looks like an inflationary factor.
Yeah. Not much we can do about, you know, other than what we are doing in trying to improve our facilities with more fuel efficient and more efficient.
Well, if we go to the next, yep, right there, yep. So just longer term would be continuation of energy conservation, right?
That's right.
Probably has a later impact, but continue, okay. And just double checking our list here from July, okay. Next one is fuel. So again, probably assuming some continued use, it's an inflationary factor, I think, Sandra?
Yes, and this again may or may not need adjustment with the
Yeah.
rising prices.
Yeah, I mean, it goes up and down and. Okay, not hearing anything. Okay. Insurance. Now we've got looks like
I think just one thing. I think we can go
yeah,
back a
you
little
bet.
bit to the fuel,
back.
and it certainly is our electrification of our fleet. Certainly may have an impact. So I just think continuation of, because that is happening. And
Yeah,
just so it's noted that we are looking at ways to reduce fuel costs, and that's through electrification and other
Yeah,
means.
good point. Okay. That longer impact.
Can we fill up in Abbotsford?
Yeah, we'll have a long extension cord to Abbotsford for electricity and for fuel. Yeah. All right. Insurance.
And good. Anybody else on fuel? Okay. Next one is insurance, which has fairly significant increase. Want to tell us about that, Sandra?
So this was actually just a placeholder added for this year because the insurance market is a really, really tight, tough one, particularly in the municipal sector. So we're expecting we had some increases this year. We expect additional increases next year.
Okay. And is this a set contract that you have?
No, we go to the market every year.
Okay.
Annually.
Okay. So we already do that. So we get the best competitive rates. Okay.
Can I ask? I should put my hand up. Are we using the municipal insurance? We're not.
MIA?
No, we're not.
Why is that, out of curiosity? We're not eligible, or we found better rates elsewhere?
Generally, I think it's the size of our municipality. We're able to find competitive rates. MFA or the insurance MIA works well for a lot of the very small communities who don't have that ability to get the contracts that municipalities the size of the Township of Atlantic can get. So that's probably one of the reasons. I would think maybe staff are doing comparisons when they do go out for contract.
Yep. And that is a good, it's a pooling, right? It's like MFA, but if you're large enough, okay.
See, if the MFA, we're legislated to borrow through MFA, I understand. Whereas MIA is more of a
it's
free market.
optional. Yeah, good point. Okay. Insurance. Next one we've got is regional charges / recoveries. That's is that the Fraser Valley Regional Library? Is that what that is?
That's what it stands for. Yeah. So maybe Sandra can advise. Is this
Yes,
just an in and out?
That's the Fraser Valley Regional Library, and so we made no change on that because we don't have an estimate of their budget at this point.
So it's just simply no change, question mark, right? We have no idea. Okay, Blair.
I was just wondering where in here do we have things like contributions that we make to Metro Vancouver, for example? Does that fit in this regional charges, or is that something else?
Sandra? Well, Metro Vancouver, there's a charge for utility for the water that we use. That's one charge, and then there's also a fee that we pay for the planning and the rest of it. But
that's correct, Your Worship. The utilities, for example, water would appear in a different category. This is really dealing with our general taxation. So Fraser Valley Regional Library, while we separate it on our tax statements, it is coming through the township, not through our utilities.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there would be some Metro fees because the planning function isn't a utility, so we pay into the planning function, the climate.
Correct. So it's relatively small in comparison, not like our water purchases or
our solid waste.
That's in here.
Wastewater. If it's not the utilities, the solid waste, the wastewater and water, it's a small portion of it. Yes. So they're saying it is in this. It is encapsulated under internal charges, or so regional charges. That's right.
Okay.
Thank you.
So
Okay, and
So so Metro would be here.
that's right.
Okay.
So we got two
Okay.
more, and then it's lunch. So why don't we get through these last two?
Internal charges and recoveries. Tell us about that one. That looks like it's a positive. Sandra?
Sorry. Yes, so this is where we have fleet recoveries and administrative recoveries from internally. So some would be from utilities. The majority would be from utilities.
So we're really just moving deck chairs,
Yeah, allocations.
right? I mean, you're just taking it from somewhere else inside the budget. So it's a zero sum. Is that correct?
Correct. It just ends up how it gets presented,
Bookkeeping.
right, from a user fee perspective.
Okay. Oh, and I like this last one. External unidentified.
That just matches up with external unidentified and revenue. Yeah.
So it's just in and out,
Placeholder,
the
that's
ledger.
right.
Okay. So with that, sounds like lunch. And I think when we come back, it's really just let's go round table and just see if there's, notwithstanding this format, which may not be the best format to do what we're doing, is there any other areas of interest that you have serious questions about, earnest questions about, or have we ever thought of doing this? Can we explore this? And we'll do a roundtable when we come back and wrap it up. How's that, Jack?
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay. See you in, what's that? I think that puts us at 12:55.
Yep, 5-2. We're back at 5-1. Okay.
See you then.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think we're all
So-
back. I don't know, Councilor Woodward. We have quorum, so Councilor Woodward's there. See if his
Yeah.
camera comes on there.
Well,
He is. Back.
let's, last round, let's just wrap it up. We'll go round table and there's no rules. It's just completely wide open. And I'll just go in the order that I see you on the gallery here. Blair, looks like you might be the first one. Anything else, it's not magical, but anything else that you have questions or ideas or whatever that staff should consider as they prepare the first draft budget?
I don't have any new ideas right now. I mean, I think we've gone through a number of things. I think there's lots to look at. I really appreciate that we're starting this process earlier than we have in previous years. So there's lots of work to do, and I think the target of 3% is great. There is the ability to adjust that, I guess, if council decides to. But right now, the target of 3 is a good target. So I'm pleased with the discussion we've had so far. Maybe at the end of the roundtable, I might have another comment, but I don't right now.
Okay, yeah. Well, it was last year we actually talked about scenario planning, right? So, I mean, we're creating a scenario, right? There'll be a scenario that's 3%, and there'll be options for it not being 3%. So that's basically what we're doing. Eric, any observations, questions, ideas?
No, I've got nothing to add. Thanks.
Okay. Bob?
Yeah, well, I'm a little concerned because we went through this document that you sent us yesterday very thoroughly, and I think we looked for whatever may be there. I mean, we have some suggestions, but I don't think they're going to add up to $8.7 million, are they? So, well, that's not the actual shortfall. But there is a shortfall, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, I didn't support the 3% because I don't see how we can do that. So I don't know where we're going to go from here. So how do we figure that out? How do we still use 3% as a guide, whereas we're 5.92% is the reality? And I suppose if we make some adjustments in the areas that we've indicated, I don't know what that would add up to. I don't think it would be sizable. Mm-hmm. So, and I have always thought that, indexing ourselves to the consumer price index or the municipal index is not a bad idea. But if that is already up over 5% right now, then, and of course, I don't want to see the taxes go up either. So I don't think we're out of the woods yet. We've just identified which woods we're in.
Yeah, right.
And I guess I'd be interested to hear what staff might suggest or take away from this that'll help to do that, or even your suggestions or the rest of council. Because now we've identified really that we're in the woods and we've got this discrepancy between the goal that we set in July and the reality of it all. So what do we hope for? More growth? Well, we did that last year and it backfired. So Gord, who's got the magic answers?
Yeah, well, that's why I showed the picture of the guy pulling the hat out of the rabbit out of the hat, right? There is no, and I think the reveal so far is that politically, there is no magic of service cuts or revenue magic that we can come up with. So it provides the parameters. That's the reveal, and from here, staff is going to have to present a scenario. Here's a 3%. And, we talk about sort of the box of 3%. And if you want to add something in, is there something to take out? And if there's not, then that's the debate you're going to have. So at this point, we've tried to avoid numbers, right? Because it's not the budget process yet. So that's what you're going to get. You're going to get a scenario that says, here's what 3% looks like. And here's everything that's been left outside of the box. And now we'll have to have some debates and discussion.
Yeah, so we've got some challenges ahead. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it doesn't get any probably clearer than that. Last time I did this, we actually had I was saying to Mark, we actually had a gymnasium wall, and we said, here's the middle box, and we had all these boxes of what you could add or delete, right? And so, it was more visual, but certainly the budget. The document we looked at today is not really that great of a reveal, as you can tell with some of the titles and stuff like that. So, so definitely there's going to have to be a lot more detail. Yeah. Margaret.
Yeah, I don't have anything really to add except that I appreciate that we're doing this now, and as we go down like the line, it'll probably become a little clearer what we want to do or what we even can do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad that we've started this in September and not in like November, December. So
yeah. Well, and the reason for today was really from the July workshop, right? Which was for us to do our best with limited information. I mean, we're almost like 9 months away from sort of the budget decision day, right? So that was the direction of council was, to have some guidance and preliminary discussion for sure. Steve?
There it is, the red light. I look for the red light every time so you guys can hear my glorious voice. First of all, we're not in this alone. There's a challenge to all communities, and some communities have a means to other resources that we don't have. And I keep mentioning casinos, but it's reality is it's out there. And other communities have, through the years, because they've got the type of population, they've got access to huge reserves that they've had accumulated over the years. Langley is an interesting community. We deliver a lot of resources similar to what big communities, and I talk about Vancouver, Burnaby, Surrey, and others. I mean, if you look at the type of programs we have, whether it's my kids played all sorts of sport. You don't see the championships coming out of the big cities anymore, Vancouver, Burnaby, and you don't see the high school championships for the quadruple A, and they're coming out of the Valley or out of the Okanagan. The big when our kids played hockey. You go into Vancouver. Usually they didn't have the teams that we had developed out here. So the thing is, I'm just using those as an example because we have the rinks, we have the sports field, we have the keen resources for a lot of different facilities and other things, and with that comes a lot of expenses, and to compete with the big guys is sometimes difficult. And we're a large rural community surrounded with a little bit of urban compared to what we possibly could have as compared to a community which is basically the same size as us, Surrey. Maybe they 1 or 2 square kilometers bigger than us, but they include I keep saying they include the floodplain when it goes out. So the reality, they've got 400 plus thousand people. We've got about 130, 140. So we're significantly smaller, but yet we still deliver the same types of services. But anyway, back to the budget thing. So things are expensive in our community, and it's a big community to police, big community for fire, because of just the size, roads and other things. So we have challenges that other communities don't have. My ideas, I mean, it's unfortunate. I know that all members of council aren't here today, but we asked for a council budget. We said, look, we as a council want to put together a budget. Some folks had said, and I didn't agree, but they said it anyway. So that's why we're here today, that there was a staff kind of budget. No, we've always had a council. Here's our opportunity as a council to direct our community in the way council wants to do. And I've always thought we always had done that. But that's why you're here today, Gord, so we could direct that. I just disappointed that not everybody's here, and I understand people get challenges in the middle of the week. But yeah, anyway, moving forward, we've got a lot of work to do, and it's going to, as Councillor Long has even said, it's going to be a challenge to address that shortfall of over 8 million. So it's going to be a challenge, and we're going to have to determine what direction we want to do. And as I said at the beginning of the meeting, and the administrator and the mayor agree, this is our last budget of this council, so we're going to have to really roll up our sleeves and do the work. And also, thank you for your input here, Gord. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Sandra, we'll do Sandra. I think Raman might still be there, Mark, and then wrap up with Jack. And maybe Sandra's not there.
No, I'm here, sorry.
Oh, there you are.
No comment. This is great. Hopefully we can take some of this away and come back with something that's helpful.
Yeah. We shouldn't take away from the fact, all across the country that it's a challenge. And when you ask elected officials, are there significant areas to cut services or reduce expenditures? It's difficult because you're not in the box, right? You're not inside the box day in, day out to know that, that kind of information. So I think today is a reveal of the limited things that council can think of, and the challenge will be for staff. So is Raman still there?
I am here and nothing to add. Thanks, Gord.
Okay, and Mark.
Just before Jason, did you have anything to add?
Oh, Jason's there. Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Jason.
sorry, Gord. Haven't had the opportunity to have to talk, but no, I'm good. Thank you. Nothing to add.
Yeah. Sorry, Jason. I didn't know you were there. Thanks.
And
Mark.
Wendy's shaking her head as well.
Yeah,
so.
I know. I didn't go there because
Well, you can't see the screen, so it's understandable. I wanted to thank everyone because there has been some valuable elements coming from this. I'll try to articulate what staff are actually, I think, sensing from this. So, as was previously said, it was council direction to get involved with the budget early so we could ensure it moves towards being this council budget, and we can go back and forth what that means. But we really appreciate the input because it does indicate the interest of council. What we've heard is that we'll continue to try to work to refine the adjustments, as has been said, continue to drill down and try to reduce them where we can, that being the expenses, and try to increase the revenues where we can. But I think everyone accepts that that's going to be marginally successful in trying to bridge the gap, but something that still has to be done. That we're hearing that we should really continue to focus on the 3%, and there may be the need for some scenarios to examine others, but that the predominant, I think, direction is 3% or less. But again, all under the auspices of making sure that we don't take any steps to dramatically increase revenue by increasing fees and charges, and that we also don't take any steps to dramatically reduce expenses, which could lead to things such as service cuts or service reductions. So with those assumptions somewhat validated, at least at this point, we can then focus on, what can we do then to try to bridge the gap? And it seems to reside in and around some of the capital items. Such things as, can we reduce our capital expenditure, or can we take our capital expenditure and borrow to achieve that and add the interest costs in and find something there that would work, or can we do a variation thereof between the two, and also involving potentially, if there is any, the use of surplus. That focus in and of itself saves us hundreds of hours of time as we can begin to focus and refine those areas to see what options and creativity we can come up with in those areas, because that's something that we probably wouldn't have started with before, but with this session, we think we can start there and at least narrow the focus of the budget in accordance with the overall direction the council has provided. So for that, Gord, we're very thankful, and we'll continue to work away.
Great. Hey, thanks, Mark. Good summary. Jack?
No, well, thank you very much, Gord, and certainly want to echo a lot what Mark said. This is a great start to the process of getting this 2022 budget put to bed sometime in next year. It's going to take a lot of work, as we could see, but this was a good 30,000-foot level look at it, where we could, take a good look at each one of those lines, have some good discussion on it. Staff can go away and come back with, like Mark said, and look at what they can do. But I think all of us know that there's still a lot of work to be done if we want to achieve 3%. And as that motion said, a business case, with a good business case, certainly it could go higher. But I don't want to presuppose that. I think there's a lot more work that can be done. I want to thank all the members of council who are here today participating. This is fantastic. I think it's a good discussion. It was a nice way to just kind of get a look at this. And I question for you, Gord, is there are 3 members of council that aren't here, and I would hope that this obviously is recorded so they could review it, but to reach out somehow to get their input if there's any questions that they had, and get them the summary so that no one's excluded, because certainly want to have input from all 9 members of council on the budget going forward. But I know this is kind of a first look. There's lots more work to be done and lots more opportunities. So. And thank you, and thanks for staff, for Sandra and Mark, and Raman, I know, for contributing to our discussion and helping us understand a little bit deeper what's going on. It's I really like this format. This is it looks like my profit loss statement that you find in our own businesses, but this is a really good look. I know there's so much more to municipal budgets, and they're so complex, and lots going on, lots of moving parts. But this was a really excellent start, and I appreciate the discussion that was had. So thank you.
Just a quick thing, and then I know Bob had a comment, but I think with working with Wendy, we can provide at a glance look at the ideas, and that can be circulated as people think more about it, or for the councillors that weren't there if they have some additional ideas. So I'll work with Wendy and Mark on that.
Yeah, definitely. And for any member of council, they may think of something later on.
Certainly. But we should have that.
That has to happen anyway. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, we should have that list so it's handy for everybody, including staff, to look at. And, Jack, I think maybe Bob had his hand up.
Yeah, I didn't want to take your last words, Your Worship, but we did have an initiative that came up earlier on about writing to whoever. Could you do that? Could you write a letter saying, okay, we've had our budget deliberations and we have a real issue with our services that we provide to our citizens, and even though COVID emergency's been lifted, we still have these challenges and shortfalls, and send it to the Premier and our MLAs and UBCM and LML and everybody.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. Perhaps you could take that back, Councillor Long, and formulate a motion we could bring to the next regular meeting, so that it's out there. I mean, we certainly have but there's not everybody's here, so maybe you give it some thought, and we can put together a motion that can go to the
well, this is a regular meeting, isn't it? So
well, it is, but not everybody's here. So just rather than I think it's good, but we have time on this one, so maybe you can come up with a motion to put on the agenda for next meeting, and then we can deal with it with everybody.
Well, if I put a motion through, it probably won't pass. Why don't you do it?
Oh, sure, we'll put something together. It'll get in there.
All right,
it's a good idea.
We don't ask, we won't get. Somebody
That's right.
Somebody on council told me, well, you don't ask, you don't get.
Exactly. We'll do our best. But, yeah. Right. Okay, Gord. Thank you very much. I don't know if there's anything else to add.
Take care, everybody.
We're ahead of schedule. It's McCaffrey Day, so go buy a Big Mac and contribute to good cause. Take care.
Great. Thanks, Jack. Bye, everybody.
Bye.